Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us this evening. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello.
This is the Aspen City Council work session for December 5th, 2022. On tonight's agenda, we have got a recreation facilities master plan update, childcare capacity goal update, and the Burlingame Early Childhood Center Education Center update as well. And we will get started on those immediately. Scott's here, so we're queuing up recreation facilities master plan first. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tory and Aspen City Council. My name is Scott Chisholm, Director of Business Services for Parks, Recreation, Golf, and the Arts. With me this evening to talk about this update for Council with our Recreation Facilities Master Plan effort is Chris Kostelik, who is a principal with Perkins & Will, an architectural consultant that is working with the city. Also this evening with us is Desiree Whitehead behind me, as well as Steve Harris, who is an associate architect with Rowland & Broughton, who is part of the team working with the city. And the team is also comprised of DHM Design, who's a landscape architectural and planning firm here in the Valley, who has been assisting and will be assisting the team and city staff with the public outreach component of this project. I'm going to keep my words brief and let Chris jump right in this evening and with our presentation.
Sounds good. Well, good afternoon. Make sure you can hear me. Is this one the on? Yep. Okay, let's do that. That's even better. Again, I'm Chris Kostelik with Perkins & Will Architects.
There's a little button at the base of that microphone. You could hit that to green as well.
There we go.
Yeah.
It's even better.
That's all
good. You get me in stereo.
Thank you.
Perfect. I feel like I'm at a press conference for the World Cup.
It's not like that.
So as Scott had mentioned, we've been embarking on this master plan, a recreation facilities master plan now for the last several months, and we've sort of gotten to a point now where we feel like really sharing that information and getting a little sort of salient guidance will be valuable to the process. And so we'll walk you through kind of the background and where we've come from and sort of talk about some of the questions we'd love to dive into today. But the purpose primarily of the process is to really take all of the previous outreach that's been done, a lot of the previous needs assessment, all the conversations around recreation facilities in Aspen, and really synthesize those so we understand kind of where we're going from. We're not starting from scratch. We understand that. We're certainly not at a blank slate phase. So really want to understand the recreational housing, parking kind of needs as they relate to recreational facilities. Identify some potential improvements, really recognize where those improvements can be most valuable or have the biggest benefit, and really understand how that future investment, if there is future investment, could yield reward, yield benefit, and really ultimately create a usable roadmap, making sure that what we recommend in this process is actionable, implementable, and logical. And so that's really our marching orders. So right now in the process, we are kind of dead smack in the middle. We've done a discovery phase where we analyzed the existing buildings, reviewed all the previous studies, took in all this great information, and from that, we developed some high-level ideas. We feel like we have a lot of understanding of the buildings and sort of this fine-grained use of those facilities. But at a very high level, we wanted to kind of put forth some big ideas to you all to sort of understand, are we on the right track? And then once we kind of get to that point, we will begin going through some decision processes, going through some public outreach, and ultimately making some recommendations in the master plan. So I will point out, we are going to talk a little bit about the public outreach at this point, but have not conducted that yet in the process. We're sort of waiting to take forth the right information. So that said, real simple to frame the project. We're talking about the ARC and the Ice Garden. We're really not diving too deep into Red Brick other than some of the programming that may be happening there, but really looking at the facility and site needs of the ARC and the Ice Garden. And so just again, to kind of reiterate, all the previous public outreach, all the previous community input, all the previous needs assessment is all sort of using or being utilized to kind of inform this study. So, you know, we're definitely picking up where a lot of that information left off, and I think that's really critical. So I also wanted to point out again, all this existing building review, I won't bore you to death with 40-year-old blueprints and building diagrams other than to say, we get it. We get what these buildings have, what they're doing, what's working, what's not. But to make sure that we really thoroughly understood that, we went through a very detailed SWOT analysis with staff to say, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are those opportunities, and what are those threats, to really understand, you know, based on where we've come in the process, what's working and what's not, and has anything changed. And so we feel like now we're on pretty stable footing to go forward with some really thoughtful master plan recommendations. So out of all that outreach, out of all of that analysis, we've really identified and sort of distilled down the list into some of the top priorities. Certainly indoor sport court opportunities are important. So a gymnasium with potentially a walking track has been identified as a high priority. Health, wellness, fitness, everything that sort of surrounds that mind-body experience has been expressed as a high priority, including group opportunities, group fitness opportunities. Child watch, some level of food service currently at the ARC, maybe enhancing food service at the Ice Garden in some way, but just recognizing that that brings people together and it's really sort of lacking in some of the facilities, making sure that there's plenty of family and community use, and then ultimately looking at the way we look at sort of multi-use space in these buildings so that they can kind of adapt a little more nimbly. And then fundamentally, maintaining 2 sheets of ice within the community is a priority, and we understand that. Some of the outdoor amenities would potentially include leisure aquatics, spray ground, and certainly the outdoor fields. And then, of course, in this community, we could never forget that some paid attention to parking and housing is critical and fundamental to any plan that works. So that said, we have a very simple and fundamental question for you today. Based on all this discovery and all these big ideas, we fundamentally have to understand, does ICE stay downtown in Aspen? The Ice Garden is currently offering ice downtown. And do we just simply enhance that, renovate it, replace it, but leave ice as a downtown amenity and really load up recreation at the ARC? Or do we pivot at this point and say, well, maybe ice becomes consolidated at the ARC, 2 sheets, more efficiently operated and run, a more consolidated program, and come up with a potential multi-use community recreation facility downtown that's more broad serving. It's not serving one programming, it's serving many. And it's more of a 12-month asset as opposed to a limited seasonal asset. And that's a very fundamental question. And so we're going to present a few options here that really kind of show you how we could kind of look at those 2 potential options. But this is really the golden question of the master plan. Before we forge ahead and get into the nuance of all these plans, we want to understand, are we at least headed in the right track with these major facilities and activities? So here are some of those ideas. First and foremost, the Ice Garden. One of the things I always think about when I look at an aging facility that has potential for renovation, I always have to answer 2 questions for myself. if we go through a sizable renovation, can we deliver a project that is as good or better than a new facility? State-of-the-art, best-in-class services. If you can answer that question, and the second question, are we making a 50-year solution? Is this something you can look back 3 generations from now and say, we did it right, we got it right? You have to be able to answer those 2 questions. And so we fundamentally looked at the Ice Garden as a facility, as an asset, and looked at its challenges. Its ADA and accessibility challenges. It's almost entirely lacking parking, very limited ability to expand. More importantly, you have some building structural issues and envelope issues and leaks and drainage. So the question is fundamentally, can you remedy that building, remediate it to be a state-of-the-art, best-in-class ice center? You probably could. You'd probably recreate the better part of that facility to essentially capture what's inside of it, but you could fundamentally do it. The one thing that a renovation really couldn't do is improve the parking in any significant way, and it wouldn't be able to recognize the potential of that property, which goes from subterranean level to 25 feet, essentially a 3-story potential. Right now we have a single sheet of ice at grade in a low slung structure. So fundamentally, remediation or renovation is possible, but it doesn't really capture the full highest and greatest use of that property. So we looked forward to another scheme that said, what if we re-envision the Ice Garden and say, what if we dug subterranean parking a level below grade and put ice at grade and then had 2 stories of supporting services, better locker rooms, better skate rental, better staff, better spectator amenity, better seating, better player amenity, essentially re-envision that facility, but do it in a way that's fully invested in the best and highest use of that site. I'm going to flip forward and you'll see a little bit better how that works. But I've also put these side by side to say the trigger of investing in the Ice Garden in that way is to then look at the ARC and say, now how do we start tackling those amenities? And many of those sort of smaller use amenities like child sitting and multi-purpose rooms can happen within that facility. But what can't happen within it is the gymnasium and the fitness addition. And so what we're showing is this idea that rather than try to get that embedded within that complicated building, we think a sizable and significant addition that's sort of part of the front entry experience is both the cleanest way to do it, the most cost-effective way to do it, the way that links best to its circulation and inner workings, and frankly is probably the least impact on current operations. You wouldn't have to shut the building down for months, if not a year, to see these renovations happen. It does unfortunately require that we would relocate the structure, the pavilion.
The Rotary Pavilion.
Rotary Pavilion. In its place, essentially relocate it to a new location on site. But what that really shows you is what the Ice Garden might look like as a replaced structure that deals with parking, that deals with the facility, brings you a first-class ice facility downtown, and enhances the ARC with recreational amenities.
Can you orientate me on that one?
Yeah, I sure can.
You're about to get to it, actually. I just can't tell. The current entry is...
Main entry is to the right, plan right. The
yellow is
the
the current part.
yeah, you can see my wand here, right here. That's the main entry.
And then on the ARC?
That's the main entry.
With a new building in front of it.
So the
there.
pavilion is the outdoor gazebo,
Yes.
right, tended structure, okay.
Yeah, so in that diagram that you're looking at, Tori, the Rotary Pavilion is, actually, I think you have a plan here in a few slides, but it'd be like in the, there you go. It shows that little yellow box, in the general vicinity of the larger orange box where that falls.
Okay.
A couple of the ways that we looked at this, and it's a very good question because we really tried to see, well, where is the potential on that site to expand? And if you really look at it, there's very little potential to expand east. Obviously, very little potential to expand north. The property line is basically on top of the building. You have these fields to the west, and then significant grade. And what we were trying to avoid was just the initial instinct to pack architecture in this wonderful sunken garden that's providing light into the pool and doing so many great things for that building. It feels like that's sort of the heavy-handed look. So even though this wasn't necessarily the obvious way to add on to this building, the more we looked at it, the more it sort of made sense. And so certainly not the only option, but gives you an idea of the scale and magnitude of that potential addition. So.
Years ago, was there conversation about a second floor on an existing roof is that no longer?
I'm going to show you that as well.
I mean, that's still an
That's
option.
as well or different? Thank you.
It's a possibility in exchange for this
Okay,
potential option.
thanks.
Yeah. Now, that wouldn't solve the gymnasium question, but that could certainly be a solution for fitness. So as you can see here, that shows you the plans of the ice garden where you'd have at the lowest level a parking structure, a parking garage, subterranean parking garage, some potential other use, whether that's some recreational use or other ice supporting uses. At the main level, you'd have lockers and staff areas. And at the upper level, you'd have viewing and potential restaurant or food service overlooking the ice with potential for some workforce housing in that. So taking advantage of the full volume of that available buildable area.
So that's 2 stories above ground plus the basement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. 25-foot height limit, obviously,
So
honoring
what would the
that.
height over the ice be?
Well, the ice would be roughly 25 feet, but rather than being this low-slung pitch that comes down to almost headroom, it would be the full 25-foot to
with
deck,
those
less
notched out
structure.
I don't mean the building itself. I mean the ice level.
Ice would be
How high
at-
is the roof on the ice level?
It would be 25 feet, potentially.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
25 minus the,
25 minus the structure, yeah. But to that question, yes, the building would sort
Still
of
be a high roof.
maximize the envelope, but not go above that 25-foot limit.
Thank you.
That would be the idea, yeah.
Sorry. It was not an important question.
Well, all questions are important because we sort of just assume that it's obvious, and the drawings aren't always obvious. So I appreciate the clear thought and questions. So there's an alternate to this that says, go ahead. Sorry.
What are the possibilities of expansion to the west towards, what is that, Castle Creek?
that one?
Maroon?
Ward, are you speaking of the expansion at the Arc?
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Which building are you speaking of?
The Arc, because
Yeah.
these contours show that it's flat up.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we do have another option that we wanted to present to council here.
Yeah. One of the challenges with that, there's 2 challenges. Number one, you've got these really precious outdoor fields that really can't be moved or relocated in that current location unless there's available land elsewhere. We would be encroaching on the fields, which is a challenge. We're going to show you some options that think about that a little. But the other challenge is if you think about that building, right now you enter that building, it's got a pretty deliberate circulation spine, and any architecture that kind of lives other side of ice becomes very difficult to access. And I mean, I'm going to just say this, that building already is a little bit of a kind of a confusing circulation. It's a bit of a mess of circulation as it is, and we certainly don't want to do anything that exacerbates that. So putting it in a clear way that you walk in, it's got clear visibility and access from the entry, I think is an important consideration, because the last thing we want to do is renovate a building and make it even less usable or more confusing than it already is. So I think that's a point to mention. But we will show you some options that kind of get to that whole field question. So there's an alternate that we looked at to the ice garden, and then we just shared some space here with the slide. I'm going to show you an alternate at the Arc. The alternate to the ice garden is to sink the ice all the way to subterranean level and actually capitalize on that highest level of available. So the ice would be -1 story and live its roof 1 story above grade, and then you'd have the ability within that sort of 25-foot buildable envelope to actually add other amenities, potentially housing, potentially recreation. The reason we really are concerned with anything that doesn't allow parking to live subterranean is you haven't dealt with the fundamental problem, which is parking. So we looked at about a dozen ways to kind of think about this building. We just kept coming back to this simple question. If you can't put parking below grade, where does it go? And if you can't get parking on the site, you've not solved your 50-year problem. And so we wanted to show the option just to say, yes, we've looked at every solution potentially, but recognize that even though we'd like to see more happen there, without solving the parking challenge, all the rest of the architecture is stymied because of it.
Can you just describe the current state of the parking situation? And I know there isn't parking there, but a lot of people come and play. Do we know like what's happening, how they're getting there? Has that changed over time?
I'm going to save a little bit, and Desiree, I'll open up to you, but, really it would be about on-street parking, right? So the folks who come and participate in activities at the Ice Garden are essentially, competing with other residential use, parking, in the neighborhoods.
Got it.
Yeah, and there's 5 designated spots in front of the Ice Garden Essential, and then it's all residential parking around.
Yeah, because I imagine unless you're leaving your gear there, you have to drive. You got a bunch of gear with hockey.
Yeah.
Or you're walking or taking the bus, yeah.
I can speak to this pretty directly. I live across the street from the Ice Garden, and when there are hockey games played and a hockey tournament going on, people park just about anywhere. Next to a fire hydrant, they get very creative.
Got it.
So there's an impact on the neighborhood.
Got it.
And of course, if we're not thinking seriously about parking solutions, then we'll continue to have probably less than ideal impacts into the neighborhood.
Got it. As a neighbor, you would say solving that's super important.
I'm able to walk more than a block if I have to park, that far away from my house. I've noticed that a lot of hockey players are unable to park their cars more than a block away.
Well, skating and walking are two different things.
All the
right?
energy is depleted on the ice.
That's right, that's right.
You don't want to sacrifice the performance.
It is, I would imagine it's a challenge, not to mention you're talking large cars full of players, so it's not just the simple drop off and go. It's a big challenge, I'd imagine.
There's worse problems in the world. Really.
True,
But,
yeah.
Yeah, it from time to time, it's a minor pain.
Yeah.
But hockey players, for the most part, are happy people. Off the ice.
Happiness and teeth retention don't correlate, is that?
Well, I design arenas and ice facilities for a living, so I'll reserve my comments on hockey play, but we feel like our job in this master plan is not just to sort of sprinkle dust on this plan and hope it works. It's got to work, and so that's why we're sort of presenting these various solutions. Just make sure we in our office we have a term we push to extremes. We want to make sure we turn over and prod on every possible idea to make sure we haven't missed some critical issue. But sometimes it's really simple, and with the Ice Garden, it's a fairly simple issue. You have some shortcomings that really need to be remedied or could be remedied. And you have a building that's got some limitations, and so we feel like that one has some potential. If you look to the right of the screen, that's also a secondary or alternate look at the arc, and that's to say to the question about fitness, you potentially could bring fitness to that upper level. One of the thoughts that we had is if you indeed build that large gymnasium, it does make a lot of sense to potentially put fitness with that core. It's more efficient to construct. Fitness can handle columns. Gymnasium doesn't want to really sit at grade because it's not accessed at that level. Fitness is at that level. So this would connect to the current fitness facilities lower level, and the gym would connect at the level of the ice. So it makes a lot of sense. The reason this solution was one that we sort of pushed back a little on, because we think it makes sense. You've already studied it. It's already been laid out structurally. This one would require all the work to happen with the facility shut down in that area. It would take significant rough construction work in the lobby to build structure like stairs, and you can't add on to an elevator. You have to disassemble an elevator to make it taller. You'd have to go in underneath the pool structure and reinforce that structure and then repaint it with high performance. So if you just kind of chase out all the things that have to happen to get that sliver of 5,500 feet to work, it'd be probably the most expensive 5,500 square feet of space that we've seen. So as much as we think it's a potential option, the challenges wouldn't outweigh the benefit of just putting it as a clean addition where it could be built, the demarc wall could be knocked down, and all of a sudden, one day when the construction's finished, fitness and gymnasium are open. It wouldn't be a year of violent construction within the building. So for that reason, we actually do think there's potential for doing that as an addition at grade. But this shows the potential for that, because if all we build is fitness, for instance, then that doesn't seem to make as much sense, right? It doesn't make sense unless the whole renovation happens or the whole addition happens.
Thank you. What I'm getting from the presentation is that the joint use we used to be having with the school district on their gymnasium is over or is insufficient. And, I can understand that. I mean, times change and demand moves on. But if we're adding these things to the ARC, where and how much new ARC parking are you adding? Because that gets overparked right now.
Yeah, so the question really is, if we add this much square footage, we would have to make that parking both more efficient, which means we'd probably have to get a few more spaces within the current, and we would probably have to add on to that. And we do have some plans. They're not in this presentation. We have looked at the way we could expand parking to accommodate those uses.
Okay, because it gets hard to sign off on one thing when you don't know what else it leads to.
Yes,
So, for me, seeing the ARC design with the outdoor pools finally added is something really important. And I'd hate to see that parking overlooks that, or a building overlooks that, or what the ARC was already piped for an outdoor pool when it was constructed. And it's been something that's been overlooked, in my mind, for a much longer time than some of these other needs.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Good point. Thank you. And to answer that, I think you hit the nail on the head, though, that this whole process is somewhat a domino effect or a shell game of if one activity happens, then some impact happens. And so, again, one of the reasons we really want to understand fundamentally, if this is the approach that we think makes the most sense, then it's our job to come back and show you how those solutions have been sort of resolved. But at this level, again, there's not a detailed plan that shows, we've got that parking dealt
I'm
with.
just thinking you have two basketball teams show up at lunch, you're going to have a new 10 parking spots,
Right.
Unless they're
Right.
carpooling.
Yeah, we're not adding low occupancy uses, right? We're adding high occupancy uses.
Question about this addition of the sliver. I understand sort of structurally, given what it's over, all the complexities that are there, and I have no opinion yet about which direction to go, but just in service of not ruling this out for that reason.
Right.
I toured a trailer last week in the trailer park where it's like a 67 trailer. The roof had caved in. They couldn't afford the new one, so they just built like a new roof structure around it, right? That was the solution that's been there for 20 years. And so I wonder if there is a less cost prohibitive solution where a new structure is sort of built around, and so it looks like a third floor, but it's actually the weight-bearing elements do not require all that internal work.
Yeah, no, good point. And really, frankly, it's not the roof of that fitness area that offers us the most challenges, it's the floor.
Got it.
Because roof loads take about 30% of what a floor load takes. So reinforcing the floor is the challenge. But to answer your question, yes, there are. I don't want to make it sound like we're against this scheme. It's a viable scheme compared to the other scheme if all things fall into place. The only sort of cons against the pro of getting fitness high up in the building with beautiful commanding views is the work that it takes to get it there. And then, as I mentioned before, this sort of convoluted circulation. Well, I like to walk into a building. I like to see the fitness. I like to walk past as I come in and walk in the door. I don't necessarily want to have to walk up, 3 floors of stairs to get to this sort of catwalk perch to see what's in most cases probably the predominant use of that sort of component of the building. So it's the structural issues and it's sort of the visual of having primary programs be highly visible and highly accessible to the user. So I think this is a viable solution compared to the other, but I just want to point out that there are some challenges that may not be quite as obvious when we just diagram it as opposed to when we look deeper at it. So I think, again, we've given you sort of, in our opinion, a distilled down version of the solutions that probably rose to the top and made the most sense. And we can start kind of pushing on those a little bit and understanding them a little more clearly. And the questions are great. I mean, you've dove right into the challenges and issues, so there's no question whether you're understanding the nuance to these differences. So I appreciate that.
Hey, Desiree, could you speak a little bit maybe to Rachel's question on our gymnasium use with the school district?
Yeah, of course. So we do still have an intergovernmental agreement with the school districts, but as their usage gets higher and our usage gets higher, we're kind of in competition for those spaces. And as they begin to, as school security becomes a higher issue, starts to restrict our usage of those facilities for potentially adult programming or different things. So, yeah, we still have that intergovernmental agreement. We're still using those facilities, but it's just as their demand increases and our demand increases, we're kind of outgrowing all of the facilities available.
Rachel, can you catch me up or educate me on that? I don't know what those agreements are or what facilities you're talking about.
The school gym, we would have men's basketball up there. I'm not sure if there's other events, but we used to have men's basketball a long time ago at the Red Brick, before it became a gymnasium. So it's adult men pickup basketball.
Got it. Okay.
And we
thank
also
you.
use them we use the middle school and the elementary school gyms for our youth basketball league that actually starts tonight. And then we use the elementary school cafeteria for our day camps and our after-school programming. And we use, but then they use our fields for their outdoor athletics. So and they use our pools and our hockey, our ice for, so it's an intergovernmental agreement between them, their usage and our usage.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose has always been to avoid duplication of facilities, but when you start bursting the seams at both facilities, you have to do something else. Thank you.
The security question kind of perked my ears up because we're being asked to relocate the Maroon Creek Trail to the other side of the road for security purposes. And now we're looking at a co-use of facilities that expose the security risk of having the Maroon Creek Trail right next to the Arc where the school's using it. So just,
How does that work?
yeah.
Oh, I think it's more of an indication that we'll eventually be given the eviction notices from the shared facilities on campus now for security reasons. But hopefully we could have a new facility created before that's over.
Did we run an indoor pickleball league last year?
We did, yes.
Is that returning?
It is not returning. We were not able to secure space just due to other programs that were happening within the school district and due to staffing, being able to have somebody, because we used to have a staff member there present to check people in and out and make sure that the doors were closed after we left and clean up after ourselves. And we unfortunately just don't have that staff as we're trying to accommodate facility usage right now.
Somebody to break up those fights that happen.
Yep, those pickleball people, you never know.
Throwing pickles all the time.
Thanks for that. Okay, this is Master Plan Option 1, the alternate, so
Yep.
there's more.
Well, we have a second master plan option, which is the flip side to that question, which says, what if the downtown Ice Garden site went to a different use? And so this is sort of flip-flopping the understanding and saying, right now, we're distributing ice. We have ice downtown and we have ice at the Arc. This essentially says, let's distribute general community recreation and consolidate ice at the Arc. And so what it's essentially saying is that downtown site could have, again, subterranean parking. It could have that gymnasium use, fitness use, community use, youth and senior programming, and essentially be more of a full-service community recreation facility at the downtown site. And simply asking the question, is that a viable possibility? Have we thought about that? If we're indeed at the precipice of considering replacing that facility, do we replace it with the same facility that's sort of the historic use, or do we reconsider that use? Simply a question to ask. In turn, it means bringing ice back out to the Arc, not necessarily expanding its recreational offerings and essentially let it do what it's doing now. The challenge, as you can see in that plan, is that ice facility doesn't really work in too many other spaces. It doesn't really nestle nicely in the way the gym and the fitness edition did. It's twice the size. So it really does start encroaching on those fields. And really, if we're going to do that, and we've heard loud and clear that those fields are precious, that they're not to be removed, then the idea is that we would actually look at a subterranean ice. So the ice would actually be below grade. Right now, the ice is actually sort of hunkered down anyway, and so this would just be sort of split level stepping the ice in a way that allows the fields then to come up over the roof of the ice. Not the cheapest solution, I will be the first to admit, but really the way to get ice there.
Maybe a dumb question. I don't play hockey. I've been thinking about it, but I don't yet. The high ceilings, they obviously feel great, but is there a minimum acceptable ceiling height? And what is it and why?
It has to do with a lot of factors. I'll keep it as brief as I can. Some of it has to do with things like sight lines between like hung scoreboards, but if we don't have that solution, it gets to really just code. Below a certain level, you don't have to fireproof your structure, so getting the structure high enough it doesn't have to have fireproofing and drop ceilings. It can just be exposed. In ice, we tend to like a little clearance, not for field of play, like you wouldn't say volleyball or basketball, but more just for the feel of the space. It's 30,000 square feet of space that feels strange if it's got a 15-foot ceiling. It's partly functional, partly for feel, and partly for code.
I'm only asking in service of like if we dug down and stacked the ice so as to not go that way, and it's not a 30-foot ceiling, but it's a double 20-foot ceiling, is that feasible? I mean, I don't know.
It could be. The only challenge with ice and what we like ice on the ground if possible. We
Yeah.
can put it over parking because we can isolate and insulate that slab and deal with it in a different way. It doesn't work as good over occupied space where you don't want dripping ceilings. So the point is, I think this is feasible, but the con is it sort of takes some of the wind out of the idea of moving ice there and being efficient and consolidated, and it's cheaper to build and operate when you're paying a significant premium to sink it below grade.
Makes sense.
However, the benefit is the flip side, that you capture this new community amenity downtown. So you can see we got to this point in the sort of fork in the road in our study where we said, this is a big question. We really need to rely on the elected, guidance and help us think through what is really the best approach and the best asset for the city in both locations. And so this shows you how it could happen.
Rachel?
Thank you. Well, and looking at this more of a GIS photo is really helpful for us. We can see the working driveway behind the building where everyone needs to bring things in and so on and so forth. And is that essentially the edge of the property line?
Well, the property boundary is actually much, much closer to the building.
Yeah.
And the majority of that driveway, is within an easement on the adjacent private property.
Okay, so we have an easement for that.
We do.
I was just going to say, the neighboring property has been sold and purchased, and potentially we'll see some sort of redevelopment plan for it. But it gets hard to say, oh, this is all we got, when I don't know if there could be negotiations to try to buy some land to have the ice garden and to have you guys have a larger site to work with and to play with or something like that. So there is that consideration. The second thing I'd just like to add is that, we'd have to think about what is the appropriate price for any housing to purchase a site, whether it's all of the ice garden or part of it or whatever. And that needs to really be looked at. It's just a small part if it's this. But I think people who'd thought about the ice garden in-town site for housing have always thought it would just be ice and a lot more housing. And I really hadn't seen we need a gymnasium somewhere come into the question before now. So that's just me. But I do think that as we're talking about this, what is that land, that site worth to the housing fund? And how much does that help pay for the larger projects? And I'll have some financial questions when we get a little further on. But that's all I was going to say is that, we're kind of designing, and yet we really don't know if there's any explored in a definitive way. Is there any way to add to the site for community recreation?
Right.
Austin, would you have any thoughts you could share? I mean, just given the state of negotiations we've been in with the Maroon Creek, with the trail,
Right.
Yeah.
being on private property or not, the notion of going onto private property with a large building expansion, it's certainly not something that we've
Yeah.
pursued
Well,
within this.
I guess all that I've heard at a level is that private property owner, with it being county land, is either going to be approaching the county for some sort of upzoning and master plan change, or he's going to be approaching the city for an upzoning and master plan change. So it just doesn't seem like, it seems a little premature to write it off, and to start spending an awful lot of money designing when I don't know what's going to be right next to that building, you know? And I don't know if that needs to be open space. I don't know what its wildlife concerns are. But it's just really hard to say this is what it is when I know at some point in time, someone's going to come in to ask for different changes to that site. And so I decided to put it out there. Thank you.
I think what you've identified is that the site challenges almost supersede some of the building constructability challenges when it comes to these big, simple moves. This is not rocket science dropping a large ice facility on a flat piece of property.
Right.
It's when you say, well, what is the highest and greatest use of other land? Is other land less costly? I'm going to guess it's not, but if it were less costly than what it would cost us for this premium on this, then that may be a better approach. We also looked at it rotated sort of in a similar kind of orientation to the gym, and that's still an option as well. It would take over less of the field space and might be sort of an interim possibility to say, can you leave some field space but not your full field?
But
That's a possibility as well.
I think one of the big selling points on the second sheet of ice there is the, energy efficiencies with the cooling sheets and potential repairs and storing the Zambonis and everything like that. So
All teams come to one place.
It'd be nice to kind of know a little more quantifiable what we think the ongoing operating savings might be from having facilities at the same spot. Thank you.
No, good, very good point, and we'd be happy to help kind of provide that, like the offset efficiencies. And as I mentioned, just having all ICE programs go to one location is certainly, from a staffing and operational standpoint, also part of that. So very good observation. Yeah.
To tag on, I was going to wait to ask this, but in terms of the constraints and partnership considerations, 3 or more years ago now, when I was first here, we're having these kind of ongoing conversations with Scott Ryder and the Spark 2 crew. And so I'm wondering, kind of a two-parter here, from a design perspective, I think one of the things that they had proposed was the second sheet of ice sort of being dug out from under what is the grade in that area, recovered so that the field remained still a usable field, maybe with some changed grade, but on site. So I guess one question is, has that been considered?
Well, and that's what this is suggesting.
Oh, so this is
just
with
not clear.
grass back over?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
That was not clear to me.
We couldn't
That's-
find a good way to draw it other than.
You're not responsible for my lack of reading
No, it's
properly.
just-
But because there's a slight difference,
Yours was in a different spot.
you depicted this as being underground at current grade.
If what I remember correctly was sort of more towards the Highlands direction of the baseball diamond,
Okay.
where you use that slope to practice your flying, or at least I used to, that it was sort of dug into that, and so then the field came back over. Not relevant. That's a good clarification for me that this is not usurping that field space that is shadowed. But the second piece is, has that group totally disappeared? I know during COVID they went away, but part of the promise that they were spinning was private dollars and coordination. And my feedback to Scott at the time was like, we need housing, and he was like, we could raise money for that, and doing the whole thing. But is there any sort of update on that? And is that a potential constraint reliever?
I'll do my best to inform of what I know. I think there are people still in the community that would be ready to rally behind an effort like that. I think they're sitting somewhat dormant right now. And I have not had any recent conversations with Scott, and he has offered his services. He has indicated that if this idea were to gain steam, that he might very well be interested in participating in support. I would also just mention that in their diagrams of the concept of the ice essentially at the grade of the existing ball field, to your point, they had the entire ball field reconstructed on top of a much larger building that included not only a second seat of ice, but a field house as well. And right now, this team has not gone into that level of a plan, a scheme, if you will, somewhat because of probably costs. It's a huge facility. It's a it's a dream project, I guess.
Got it.
So we have not gone there yet.
Got it.
Ward, and then Rachel,
Well, Rachel and Skip, you're both
and then Tori.
hitting upon questions, and then Tori.
Calling on myself.
Questions that are floating in my consciousness, one of which is what Skip, you brought up about the advisory board. I don't think we've had a joint meeting with the advisory board in 5 years, maybe. Spark, I know that some of the plans for Spark included hockey academies, hockey camps, and increased usage of the facility. Those are things that are concerning to me. I generally like the idea, as Rachel's pointed out, of the economy of having 2 sheets of ice in the same place, but you've also mentioned the challenge of parking. We know what happens at the ice garden when there's something going on, and is there potential at this master plan option 2 or the alternate to have enough parking that if we do have a hockey tournament, which is not unusual, that we have both sheets of ice being used at the same time and the facility open for other activities. So I like the idea of having a lot of stuff in the same place, but the parking is an issue, and also the increased usage for academies. I want to loop in that Spark, that conversation we had a few years ago. Certainly always looking for partners that can help fund. But this plan and the one after it are attractive to me. The idea of having the downtown facility, I don't know if I thought we replaced the compressor at the ice garden a couple of years ago.
There's been some work on the system, but it still needs.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything that if we could salvage any of that, if we want to put an old compressor at a new piece of ice, but I'm interested in exploring the master plan option 2 alternate, but I have some reservations about increased usage there and parking.
Thanks, Ward.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think we really need to drill down on the parking more for any of these plants, plain and simple. And, it strikes me that given the land mass you have now, you might be able to reconfigure a little bit. But if you start having that much use up there, you're really going to have to start talking about a decked parking, something like the meadows, so no ventilation systems needed or something. But you're going to need a double deck to that limited parking lot. And we need to kind of take a look at those costs all coming together.
Bless you. Thank you.
This is, I'm not ready to weigh in on an alternative. It seems like there's a lot that you guys know real well, and we're just still kind of getting our minds around. But for me, this is hard to do without really starting to look a little bit at budget.
Oh, yeah.
Because, there's got to be a balance between facilities, pure construction, facilities, maintenance, keeping them up, replacing capital reserves, then our open space and trails items that are going forward. I mean, I know we got that big question about the bridge at the Rio Grande over the Roaring Fork, to connect the Airport Business Center. And those are major things. And so I'm just a little concerned, and I know we have to do these piece by piece, and it's good to have a master plan to know where you're going, whether you can afford it now or you're going to need it in 10 years. But we're still working on the idea of the recovery of the subsidy ratio on recreation. And we're not at the 50-50. I think we've been somewhere else 70-30. And so for me, I'm sitting there going, well, we're struggling to get back to that ratio. How much new debt can we take on for new programming and staffing? And we all know that staffing in any line of business in this community has gotten really, really tough. So those things just make me feel a little out of sequence to be able to say, hey, here's a great master plan, because it all feels a little wish list to me. I mean, I'm super excited that the tax passed, and we can go forward with that, but I also know we had major expenditures out of that planned already over at Cozy Point catching up. So this is just, for me, hard to know how do we balance those three things. Constructing whole new facilities, $20-40 million. The Rio Grande Bridge, whatever our share is going to be in the millions and millions of dollars. And then how do we get back to the 50% subsidy? Or is that a ratio we need to change and program into our long-range budgets? And then what is the maintenance cost going forward on all these buildings? Have we been maintaining them sufficiently? Are we allocating enough for that? So those things make me hesitant to try to say this one's better or that one's better. And I really don't feel like I have parking numbers. And so if a new gymnasium is added here and how many more spaces does that mean? Or if it's the second sheet of ice and it's Hockey Mountain High weekend, how many new spaces does that mean with the rest of our community still using the rest of the facility? And so that's some of the issues that are challenging me, because we had to close this winter when we couldn't even staff it all the way. And then to think about adding new facilities at a second location with underground parking, wow, this is just an awful lot to be contemplating without some numbers attached, or even how we would face it going forward. And I know you're just at the preliminary part of wanting us to try to weigh in on it, but those are kind of like missing chunks of information for me.
They're also in the big ideas box. They're like trying to get us out there so we can.
And if there was one other one I wanted to ask about in the giant idea box, is, we had heard that the gymnasium facility that we currently have for at the Red Brick is pretty inadequate, and it's just been made into a place for practicing gymnastics, not the regular fitness, not basketball. And it's made me wonder, well, whether gymnastics should be up at the Arc as opposed to over in the Red Brick, and could that, or should that gym there be built into something else? Is that maybe an easier trade-off? But, what are the key things to have together? And it always used to be the thought when ARC was designed that, you could have your daughter in the figure skating classes over here, and someone's in the swim thing here, and someone's in that there. But if we do it wrong, someone's going to be running between the Red Brick to the old ice garden and up to the Arc, and then back around in a triangle to pick up and drop off all their kids. So I would be a little more concerned about having consolidation as opposed to having things spread apart. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate a lot of those comments, and I'm glad you said them before I did. I want to be clear here. We started off with a fundamental question, and that is ice garden or community recreation downtown. It doesn't sound like right now most council members have the ability to just simply answer that here tonight.
Fair enough.
So if the goal tonight was to get an answer to that, I don't think we're going to get there.
I think we really wanted to do what we're doing right now, is to have a dialogue, understand that, it's our intent, next step, to go in front of stakeholders. But we really wanted to just get an idea of where council might stand in that public communication process. And, if there's anything that we should be sharing with the public from you, the council.
Okay.
Are we skipping slides?
No, I'm just getting to the public. If you were to start talking
I
about
want
it.
to see the rest of it.
Yeah,
You guys talk through it.
I'll go back.
Okay, so I'll make a quick comment about the slide that you have up now, stakeholder and public engagement plan. I'm not sure we're ready to go there because it just sounds so amorphic at this time as well. We have a lot of questions to answer. For me, have we had preliminary conversations or preliminary surveys with even our ICE users? And I mean that in the respect of, yes, Spark has talked a long time about putting a second sheet out at the Arc. We hear a conversation about whether it is better to have it in town and what that means for not just the ICE users, but community as well. Anyway, so if we haven't even had that conversation, I'd love to know some of that. I personally have a lot of concerns biting off so much of a large project, no matter which alternative we go with. I am interested, as Rachel kind of enumerated a few capacity increases. What is the usership of the fitness facilities that's at the Arc right now? And then what would we be building for? How does that impact parking and access? I think Rachel had a great suggestion to look at the red brick and some of those uses, and perhaps those are some things that want to move. We did just recently in the last couple of weeks have that conversation about red brick facilities not really working to their own benefit is the way that I'd say it. Yes, there's user groups in there, but I hear from each one of those user groups of the limitations that even that they have at the red brick now. I have other questions. The conversation about a field house isn't in this. Indoor tennis isn't in this. Turf changes. We have got the fake turf at the Arc on the Island field. I shared an article in the past couple months that was talking about some of the issues that a lot of users are having with those fields. Are we talking about in the future changing back to natural turf or another alternative? Or is even the life of the turf out there another $1 million+ cost that we're going to be seeing come before us in the next 3 to 5 years? But just to reiterate for council's knowledge, the article that I sent on was, I believe, dealing with some of the health concerns around some of the materials that are used in the AstroTurf that we use. And that wasn't local, that was actually a national article that I was sharing. I have concerns along the same line with the work that we are embarking on at Cozy Point. We often talk about improvements to the golf course and the facilities there. So overall, I'm just concerned about taking on something like this at a time where it seems like we have a lot going on as well, and staffing and our focus on current projects is something that I would want to see before we get ahead of ourselves and look to expand and do more. This council and council before, we've talked about the Ice Garden as housing opportunities. And so I'm not against us exploring these possibilities, but right now this is really low on kind of my priority list for budgeting, bonding, staff time, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for the update of where we are with answering this question as opposed to going out to stakeholders and user groups and public outreach next. Again, if we're going out to public engagement, I mean, simple basic questions to start lighting the way would be great for me. I really would not embark on a full-blown outreach program that says at the end of it, the result shall be what the community wants to build. I just am, we've got a lot going on. We got lumberyard housing we're trying to bring online soon. We've got highway improvements that we're embarking on. I don't know that the city needs to be moving full force on this at this time. Ward?
Yeah, your last two comments were, we have some huge projects that are going to need funding, lumberyard and the project formerly known as Entrance to Aspen. Newcastle Creek Bridge. So, I mean, we all want everything all the time, but the level of staff involvement, staff commitments, what the community can bear, bonding, taxing, this, I mean, I'd love to say, yeah, let's get it done, but there are a lot of other things going on, and staff only has so much bandwidth. So I share your concerns, and Rachel expressed some of the same. There's just so much going on.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, just a couple comments. Let's see. Number one, I agree with Rachel. I see the logic in having 2 sheets of ice in the same location. That said, I'm sure our local hockey players are going to weigh in on that. Let's see, what was my second issue was, I'm really excited about the possibility of housing at the Ice Garden, if that is the direction we choose to go. But I also agree with just about what all other council people have said, is we have a pretty full plate right now, and we haven't even talked about refurbishing the armory. So,
Forgot that one.
Plus Burlingame 3, there's a few others lingering out there.
so in conclusion, I also share the sentiments that this is a pretty low priority for me. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
There's questions.
Yep.
Can we go back to Master Plan 2, Part 2? Whatever that is. Yeah. Can you talk, yes. So just the community recreation at the Ice Garden for option 2, Part 2. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yes, and it's not been fully resolved to a detailed status where you could point to every space, but the idea is it would be, and I think to the point of having sort of distributed recreation, having a concern over that, I think it would tend to augment the programs that aren't really robust at the ARC, i.e. gymnasium and court sports, probably a greater level of fitness. If the ARC has pretty, if I can say it, it's more strength fitness, right? The downstairs is mostly weightlifting, and then you've got the small room that took over the meeting room in the front that's got some bikes and some cardio. So right now, fitness is not really, I would say, not really health club fitness at the ARC. It's really, I'll call it dryland training for the ice users and the sports users, really. That's really what you're seeing. So the point being is, I don't think this is necessarily redundant to what's happening at the ARC. It would really be in complement. This would be really more of a recreational and community use facility that doesn't necessarily compete. So that was the intent, that it would be primarily fitness, health, wellness, gymnasium, court sport uses, maybe some child sitting, and maybe some multi-use community meeting type of space, enrichment, classroom type of space. And then, as you can see in the yellow, predominance of housing.
Got it.
A size more than just workforce housing to support the staff of the facility. This would actually
Some
be
actual housing.
more housing. Yeah.
But more or less 2 floors of general community use and housing and 1 floor of parking.
Yes, yes, exactly.
All right.
Hopefully that clarified it, yeah.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. To try to answer your question as directly as I can, although this is not firm yet, my general preference is to see more of the housing use in town and the ice use near the ARC. I think the value around having multiple sheets in one place makes sense to me, but mostly just having housing within the roundabout is just invaluable for a number of reasons, and I think there's a lot of value there. I, too, was, I guess I wasn't expecting so much new and different kind of community use in general as part of this, and so it's interesting. I want to explore that more. I'm in agreement with everyone here. Like, I don't think this is something that needs to happen in 6 months. And I think, given the other options, but I also assume that if this was a budgetary non-starter, or if the timeline wasn't sufficiently far off to have this conversation now, we wouldn't be having it now. So I'm just making the assumption that within your timeline, this is worth exploring. And if that's incorrect, we'll come back with additional information later. So for me, I think, next steps are not about a broad public outreach and sharing all the things and doing all the workshops. It's really about 2 things. What are the real constraints when we poke at all the loose, blocks in the Jenga game? And how much of this could really be community-led, right? Like what is the way that this would come together in which the community would want to lead on this, both from a contribution of funds, potentially a contribution of land, and also potentially a contribution of programming and operation, right? What is so exciting to people that they would be willing to take on a lot of this? And so specifically, I think about, re-engaging sort of Spark and those funders and just getting a sense of like, is there any there and what would they be looking for? We talked about adjacent property owners. We talked about engaging back with the schools about what do those things look like. But the other thing that really comes up for me is engaging the local fitness ownership community of private businesses. My understanding, and Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong, is part of the reason why the fitness at the Arc is what I would describe as a little sad is because we didn't want to usurp from the private fitness community. And the reality now is, the Aspen Club is gone, highly missed. JR's is getting kicked out at any moment. A number of other studios of various types that I won't name, every 6 months it's like we're going to be gone. Not because they don't want to, but because the economics are so challenging in that space. And so I think we're kind of in a new place where we can engage from a different place of like, hey, look, the reality is nobody running a brick and mortar fitness business in the downtown core is doing it to get rich. They're spending $2-3 million a year to make 2 to 5, maybe 10% to like have their family in affordable housing unit, right? And so what if you didn't have to worry about all of that? You could have the same end of the day income, and you could partner with the city for space, and you could make it your own or brand it, or maybe it's more of like a hawker center for fitness thing where we provide the space and they take little sections or they split it up by time. I mean, who knows?
We work out.
Right, yeah. I mean, who knows? But could we be the partner that empowers them to have a space they can rely on forever, right? And so I think those would be the initial conversations I'd want to have to really get a sense of like what are the constraints, the opportunities, the partnerships, and then kind of come back with a report on what's possible. And I think that could drive where we do or don't want to invest in the more expensive things of figuring out parking and roof structures and all that stuff based on what's actually possible. All that said, super excited we're having this conversation. Love that we're doing big ideas. I think when we talked about the ice garden roof repair during the parks presentation, I was like, I don't know if y'all are going to think I have 3 heads for bringing up housing at the ice garden again. And to find that we've are way ahead of whatever I was suggesting is amazing. So thank you for that.
Rachel?
Yeah, I also think this is really valuable, and getting it in front of us is something that's important for your whole agency and the community as well, because it really does help when you evaluate future major capital for repairs or not, a point in time in which it's not worth repairing the old car, time to get the new car. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of double down on Tori's one comment, and that is to get more of this actual kind of usage numbers now and capacity. We don't want to design for Christmas morning. We also don't want to be just designing for the off-season. We want to try to hit a good target of potential growth and demand and current usage. But I don't have those numbers to really take a look at that right now. And that would be across almost all the programs. It's important to know, the change from some sports to pickleball was just something that happened over the last 10 years. And I don't know if there's more uptake of some of our recreation and less than others and things like that, so.
No,
It's a
very
great
good
point, and I just, that's something we have to check in internally, but also externally, because sort of like affordable shopping downtown, we have to assume that the actual accessible fitness of any kind in any privately owned real estate downtown is going to go to zero in the next 20 years.
John, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I can guarantee Scott Ryder is very interested in seeing this project move forward.
Good.
Please reach out to him.
And Scott's wound up.
Is there any more clarity you'd like? I mean, I understand the purpose and what you want to get out of this meeting. Is there anything that we can clarify for you?
No, I think that you've been very helpful this evening, and I think just to reiterate what we're hearing is that the level of stakeholder involvement, we want to be very targeted, right? starting with Spark, starting with the ARC Advisory Board, and that we would obviously have that engagement and come back to council, and to be able to answer some of those questions that Tori and you all have highlighted for us. And so, thank you.
Correct.
Sounds great.
And I don't know if this even matters for those conversations, but am I correct in that we're kind of leaning towards liking housing in town, ice outside, but have not had enough conversation to be determined about that?
I think that housing's a big goal for all of us, but I don't think that's the inflection we want to put into these discussions. They're going out to ask others there.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that will come back to council for us to say, like, okay, now we've heard all this, guess what? Housing wins.
Got it.
But
That makes sense.
we'll find out when we get some information back.
So
Yeah, Scott,
I think this was, to echo Scott, and this was exactly what we had hoped to hear. I have to admit, this was not a surprise. The scale of it was not surprising, but we wouldn't have been doing the job of a master plan to not, as we mentioned, push on those pieces. But what I heard, and to kind of echo again, Scott, we owe back not only the feedback from the various specific user groups to understand their specific need, a scalable or sort of starting with some level of minimal renovation up through the options we showed you with some cost range, detailed study of parking so that we don't move forward on a plan that can't work because it's missing some big blind spot of structured parking or something. So that's what I heard that we need to come back forward with is some level of high level costing, parking understanding, site area understanding, and then user group feedback, and then specifically some level of operational analysis that says, yes, we are sort of encroaching on an enterprise approach to this, where we know what programs are costing, we know what they're generating in revenue, and we're actually on the right track with augmenting the right programs and not building the wrong things. So that was just my summary for what it's worth.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Council.
thank you all. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Tory.
Thank you.
Thanks for your hard work.
Yeah.
If we don't see you between now and then, happy holidays. Have a
Holidays to
great
you all.
end of the
Thank you.
year.
Let it snow.
That's right.
All right, we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is the council childcare goal, so childcare capacity goal update.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. So this is, they're both on, so. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm going to share my screen. Does that look good? Okay. So, hi, council. Bless you. Hi, City Council and Mayor and City Manager and Jim True. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Monahan, and this is Nancy Nichols. We are co-managers of Kids First. We really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us tonight. Obviously, we're here to discuss childcare capacity and how we can support families and young children and childcare providers. So our first item, if it will let me. There we go. So the first thing we want to talk
Good
about
photo.
is successes.
Cute.
Is that so cute? So the waitlist platform is rolling out early 2023, and that's called Bridge Care, and that will give us that real data that we need for our waitlist information for Kids First, but also for the programs and also for families. And then the next celebration is the Little Steps College Infant Room at Aspen CMC, open today.
Nice.
So it's really a huge celebration. Dana Ruiz is the director there. And she and her staff have done a really beautiful job opening the room there. That's been donated by CMC, and we really appreciate that collaboration with Colorado Mountain College. So big celebration there. The next celebration is those empty classrooms in the Yellow Brick Building. We have Ajax Cubs that are opening those classrooms in January, so.
Official.
Fantastic.
Yay. And they will be serving families with children ages 6 weeks to 5 years old, which is a big deal. Yeah. And then the hiring bonus, we're continuing that. It's a new program. And the childcare programs have indicated that this has been really a great incentive for potential new hires. So that's $1,500 for new full-time teachers. And that's been a really great program.
So some of that's been distributed? There's been some
To
that
12
have taken advantage of it?
Yeah.
12?
12 new
Thank you.
teachers, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. They get $1,000 when they get hired, and then 50 or 500 after 6 months.
Which is great.
Yeah, really great. So today we are here to present to you our 3 policy questions. Do you support wage enhancement funding, which we'll talk about in the next slide? I know that's a big conversation. Also, does council approve free rent for the Yellow Brick Building programs? Should it be a pilot program for a year, or should it be ongoing? And then, do you support adding that snow melt system to the Yellow Brick entry in the capital project? So we're going to start with the wage enhancement grant funding.
Megan, can I just ask one clarifying? On the CMC and the Yellow Brick, I know it's in the packet, but I don't recall, what's the total addition of spots? And it's non-fixed, right, because depending on the ages, but what's the range?
It's really hard to say because with the infant room at CMC, she can have 8 infants at a time each day, and that is going to depend on how many families want 5 days a week, 2 days a week. So it really depends. Right now,
Okay.
I think she has 5 enrolled, and then she's holding a few spaces for CMC staff because that's part of our agreement with them. Yeah. And then with Ajax Cubs, I mean, that could be anywhere from like 90 spaces.
Well, they'll have a classroom in each age group, so they'll have an infant room, which is about 8. They'll have a toddler room, which
Yeah,
is 8 to 10.
thanks, Sarah.
I always get
Sorry.
yelled at around here.
So the toddler room is generally 8 to 10. Then they'll have preschool-type rooms, 3 to 5s, and those rooms can have capacity of 16 to 20 kids. So that's the daily capacity. That could serve many more families because, as Megan was explaining, one family might just go 3 days a week, and one family might go 4 or 2. So the number of families it will serve, we can't pinpoint, but we can say that once they're fully open, 20, 40, 50, 60 kids a day, roughly?
Awesome.
But just a kind of small footnote, the ones in the Yellow Brick are really restored spaces that we had in the past, and then now they're equipped again. The only real addition to the shortfall was the CMC rule.
Well, and also the
We're
Yellow Brick,
underutilizing, right?
in the Yellow Brick, we're adding infant care.
Okay, so there's one new room of infant care and the same capacity for the other age groups that
Yes.
we had before.
Yes.
So in between the two, we've added about 12, 16 infant care spots.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, thank you. So the wage enhancement grant funding, we're going to start with this. I know it's a big conversation. This is our basic idea of the original wage enhancement plan. We described it in more detail in the memo that you received. The advisory board recommends wage increase to all childcare providers in Pickens County. And so this is the basic framework. And in light of the county's proposal? They don't, okay. Okay. So Okay. All right. So that kind of shifts gears a little bit. So basically, it would be $500 a month per teacher who's full-time, so it's $6,000 a year, $250 a month for part-time teachers. Our question for you is really who receives it? Teachers in city limits, in the urban growth boundary, or within Pickens County. And then there's that sustainability piece. It's really important. It's based on the child care programs increasing their tuition rates over time. And at the same time, Kids First is raising our financial aid numbers to kind of balance out for families and child care providers. We have a funding model that Pete has created. So he may be able to do a lot better job explaining it to you all. But we have two examples basically explaining the wage enhancement grant. One is over 5 years. The top one is 5 years. The other is over 10 years. The program would be structured so that child care programs would begin raising tuition yearly over the 5 years, thus enabling them to have those operational funds to provide the wage increase without the city funding. So if you look at the top chart there, the far right-hand column is what's the cost to the city, and then each color represents either within city limits, urban growth boundary, or within Pickens County. So we took the median daily tuition and then how much that wage enhancement per teacher is $500. So how much would the program need to increase tuition? So it's a very small percentage point, and it ends up being less than $1 a day. So it's not a big number. But these are two different models that Pete helped us come up with, and he has a much more complicated model. Skippy.
I just want to clarify to make sure I'm understanding it. We looked at what the total increase in tuition would need to be, and then we divided it by the period. So it's a $25 bump in the middle circumstance paid every month. It's not that we go from, to make up a number, 100 to 125 to 150 to 175. It's not a compounding addition.
To pay tuition,
Yeah.
are you talking about?
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah. So the top one is.
No, I'd like Pete to comment on that. I believe this is a compounding increase year after year because the subsidy goes down each year.
That's correct. Thank you. Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah, so the impact here of 1.3% is the annual growth rate you'd have to have under that top row. Every year you'd have to increase by 1.3% on tuition to cover the cost of the city slowly decreasing its share and the providers basically building that into tuition.
Got it. And so is the $24.50 per month, is that the year one 1.3 increase, or is that the average over the 5 years of it compounding?
That would be every year. That's the equivalent of the 1.3%. So right now, tuition on average is about $80 to $85 a day, as it says there. So you'd be saying that you multiply that by 20 days in a year, that would give you, or 20 days in a month, that'll give you your monthly tuition amount. And then you'd say you'd have to tack on another $24 that month. So it comes out to a little bit, right around $1 or less than $1 a day to build in that cost every year for the next 5 years.
These numbers are small enough that this isn't, I'm being a little pedantic, but so is $24.50 the average, or is $24.50 year one and year two is going to be $24.50 times 1 and 1.3%?
Yeah, it's $24.50 year one, another $24.50 year two, another $24.50 year three.
Okay, it's average. Okay, thank you.
It's straight lined.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete. So it's a small percentage, and if programs were to increase to the true costs, so if tomorrow they decided to charge the true cost of childcare, they would be able to meet the wage increase right away. It's just that would be a huge impact on families. We do have resources through EPIC to support programs to create plans for their unique businesses in order to implement this wage increase. so that it wouldn't have that huge impact on families.
And just to clarify, EPIC is the acronym for the Excellent Partnerships in Childcare, which is a nonprofit that specializes specifically in helping build business capacity, both on the profit and nonprofit side of early childhood education programs throughout the country.
Cool.
Thanks, Sarah.
Epic.
Sounds like an epic program.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So there's another perspective. The Kids First Advisory Board, what their recommendation is to fund a 5-year flat $500 stipend. So same $500 stipend with a 5-year phase out to all of the educators in Pickens County. And that total cost would be less than $5 million over the 10-year period. So I know you're not looking at that right now, but that's what the Kids First Advisory Board is recommending. And I know that we're probably not going to make a decision on this today. There are ways that programs can help to increase that funding so that when we decrease that wage enhancement, they can do fundraising, they can write grants, they can raise their tuition. So there are a lot of different ways that they can do that without it being too painful for them and their families. So what questions do we have about this?
Are there any models of this? Does something like this happen anywhere else?
Well, wage subsidy in certain professions is not unheard of. I think it's maybe a first for here in the Valley to this level, but you see it in nursing, you see it in lots of different professions where there'll be wage subsidy. I think that the thing that's different here is that the intention of the wage subsidy here is to stabilize a workforce, not necessarily always recruiting one. In this particular program that's being presented to you today. And so it's really looking at not building more capacity, but it's about filling the educator slots that are needed today, rather than growing beyond those numbers today. Now, if it happens, we'll certainly take a look at the financial impact and bring that back to you if it's something that we think is substantial. But that would be my thoughts on that particular question.
Thanks. Rachel and then Ward.
Yeah, thank you. I love it when I get to listen to NPR in the car. And I was listening to the Marketplace with Kai Risdahl the other day at the moment of context, he calls it at the end, that over the last 5 years, wages had gone up about 25, almost 26%. And sounds like good news, except that housing prices and rents in the past 5 years have gone up 36%. And that people who used to be able to make their housing costs in about 58, 59 hours a month, it's now up to a minimum of 64 hours a month. And so we know these sort of pressures are hitting our childcare workers, and it's one of the lowest income type of jobs there is, although it's one of the most important. I have mentioned this before, but you see it on all the doors at City Market. They're offering a $3 winter premium to anyone who would like to work for them this winter. It will go away at some point in the springtime, but it is wage enhancement to be able to keep people. It's different. They're a corporation. They have a profit motive, but we have a motive of providing good childcare. And so I do support this. That $3 an hour works out to just a little under $500 a month if you work a 40-hour week. So it's just about the same thing that we're doing or considering doing. I think the most important thing to me is to be able to track how does this show up later in the successful budgets of these organizations. And that's the same comment I would carry through on the free rent at the Yellow Brick proposal. I want to see that it translates into wages for the staff over time, or something. I don't want to see it just be a $20,000 director bonus, and then, the rest of the organization is still cash strapped. And so I want to have us be able to find a way that we can track how free rent is assisting the stability of the program and building up some reserves, as well as how is the wage enhancement really helping. As you've said, the commitment to raising wages, raising tuition to be part of the phase-out, that's an incredibly important component to me. And that you've heard me say it before, I think that we have some users of our childcare facility who need no subsidy whatsoever, yet we're subsidizing the whole program so much that that subsidy to them is hidden. And we are working to increase the family grants to be able to make up the tuition increase for those whose wages aren't really keeping up as well. So I think this really is the right approach, and I appreciate the work that's been done in it. Without knowing how this does fit in with the county program, I really can't pick between the limits of where. But I tend to also think it'd be best to do this on either a 5 or maybe 6-year basis or something to see how it plays out and to be able to readjust as needed later. I wouldn't want to start a 10-year phase out. I think it would take too long, and I'd really love to see some of these folks being able to get their business model up a little bit and the type of wages those workers deserve. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Ward?
May I interrupt you real quick? I would just ask if we could focus on clarifying questions of this proposal, because I still need to present to you the county's position, which could influence some of your decision-making tonight. So if we could limit Mr. Mayor that way, it would be extremely helpful to staff. Thank you.
So questions of this proposal, and also there's a note in our packet that also says that the Kids First Board recommendation is of the 5-year as well.
And the whole county.
Correct.
Yeah, my concerns, my questions, I mean, I like this, but I want to hear what the county has. I'm looking for a geopolitical commitment. I want commitment from our other partners for the city to pay for all of the enhancements that benefit everybody in the county. I'm looking for a partner from the county for funding just beyond what the federal government has handed out. So that's what I'm looking for, is what the counties come to the table with and how they're going to be a partner in providing a stipend and availability and affordability, accessibility of early childhood education.
All right, we'll get that answer in just a minute. Any other questions at this time? All right. Do you want to cover that?
Sure. So in fairness to the Kids First Board, they made their recommendation to you prior to having this county staff position known to them. The county staff is going to be recommending to the BOCC that that wage enhancement from county funds, and they're actually federal funds, pass through to the county. So let's clarify, this is not local money. Would be available to any provider in Pickens County up to $1,500 per educator or critical position. However, the staff position is that if there is any subsidy from anywhere else on wage enhancement, that the county will reduce its subsidy. So therefore, from their views, that should a subsidy reach $1,500 per educator from another source, that they will not provide any additional assistance to that provider.
So that's a one-time $1,500?
So they will do it as long as their funding lasts. So if you, City Council, choose to fund about the 30 to 35, well, probably with Ajax, we're a little higher now. We're probably up to maybe 40-ish, 45 educators that will be within the city limits. If you choose to fund the $1,500 per year, there will be no county subsidy provided to any of those providers.
So, Sarah, the county's offer is countywide, including the city.
Correct. I'm giving you the staff recommendation. The BOCC has not discussed the policy yet. Okay. The staff rationale is that they feel like it's double dipping, is the word that was used with me several times in the conversation, rather than lifting all boats is the way I view it. So we definitely have some divergent views. But I want you to be aware. So if you choose to fund this at $1,000 per educator, the county would anticipate, city staff anticipate the county recommendation to pick up the other $500. under the federal dollars they're passing through.
But we're talking about 6,000 an annual.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking 1,500 per quarter because that's the way the county plans to distribute their money. I apologize. It's
Okay.
6,000 a year. Same dollar amount right now.
Okay.
So you have options though, right? This is not a limiting factor to your conversation, but it's an important one for you to know. And so you have options that if you choose to go within city limits, you might come back and tell us 6,000 providers is not enough. You want that number higher because you're going to have the resources to do it. You might say, no, we want them to take that county money and we'll be there to pick up certain programs when the county runs out of its one-time dollars, which is what their proposal is. It'll last maybe 3 to 4 years, depending upon how they expend it. They're spending about $70,000 of it in administrative costs to a third party to administer the disbursement of funds for them. However, we don't have those kinds of costs within our program because we already have these relationships built into the Kids First.
Right. So if we didn't allocate a single dollar anywhere, their funds would cover the $6,000 per educator in the county, including the city, for 3 to 4 years?
For about, so their plan is to fully fund the 6,000 in years 1 and 2 and fund it at 3,000 in year 4. I don't know what the number of providers they base that on. If it included the additional staff at Ajax, I doubt it, because that was an unknown at the time of their financial
Correct.
analysis. So my guess is their funding would only last about that 2.5 years. Right now, there's no, on the county funding, there's no, well, here, for example, we're requiring, the city staff proposal requires an agreement to be willing to increase tuition to help cover the subsidy. So it's a gradual transition for families in the program. This is benevolent giving at the county. There is no requirement like that, which can be great in the beginning, but when the funding ends, it's gone.
This is really confusing. But it sounds like, to me, the logical thing to do is say, let the county fund all the providers until their money is gone, and potentially use this money we were thinking of using to try to secure some long-range housing, or hold it in abeyance until we need to start backfilling what the county's no longer doing. But the fact that the dollars aren't working together, and that there's no requirement on their dollars as conceived now to see the tuition levels come up to start generating from tuition the wages necessarily to provide the service. I can't see why we would go forward. I think we should let the county go forward, expend the one-time non-replenishing funds that they have, and use these sort of dollars to try to secure some long-range housing. That's what I would see, you know.
No, I appreciate it. Sarah, is what Rachel said, is that, has it not been part of the county conversation, as far as you know, about kind of these steps?
Sure, the county would be very happy to spend their funds first. My concern for you as a governing body, and I've expressed this privately to the county as well, is what happens after their money runs out? And is the Kids First Fund now accepting a long-term obligation that prevents it from doing some of its other core mission pieces, particularly because that tuition increase is not tied to their benevolent giving? Right. I mean, I struggle with a lot of the mechanics of what the staff proposal is at the county and understanding how that's going to affect change for the long term. It's like you're going to give it a boost, but there's not really a game plan for dealing with that when that money runs out.
So the tuition increases, as we've kind of outlined a scaling up program, that is not part of county discussions?
Correct. The county has no requirement for for better business practices or tuition analysis or anything like that currently in its proposal.
Okay. So what Rachel was just kind of suggesting there is one direction that we could go, and it is one direction that it does make sense to me. I completely get that. Another way that we might want to go, and originally my thinking on this was that if we supported within city limits, if we took care of our city limits, it's about 40% of the providers. That essentially helps the county they can distribute their money outside the city. So again, this is just kind of something for council members to kind of mull on what you think about the approach there. But either one, I think what Rachel has just said is kind of option A, and then option B for me would be for us to fulfill within the city limits, thereby allowing county to focus on county. And it could, anyway, if there's such thing as a one-sided partnership, that might be it, where we are just simply allowing the county's funds to be focused on outside city limits. But anyway, those two ideas are two kind of ways that I thought that we might go at this, but open to others as well.
To say, I think that that's a
Rachel, can I
legitimate
speak?
idea, too.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for partnership from the county, and I see federal dollars but no county dollars. I see this as a good solution to subsidizing funding and the rent and all the rest of it, but I see a suggestion or a proposal from county staff, but no direction from the Board of County Commissioners. So I want to know what's on the table, what they are offering, if they're gonna be led by staff recommendation, or if they're gonna have their own wisdom and have some funding from their own sources instead of just handing out federal government money. It's a county-wide issue, and I'm looking for partnership. So this end result is good. How the pie is sliced is important to me, and I'm looking for an active partner from the county.
Well, I can share with you, I've had limited conversations with the chair of the BOCC, and the outline, as Sarah has shared with us, is I haven't heard any deviation from that. We've had our conversations that included the word partnership and mutual support and collaboration, and yet it's, as far as we've gotten, is kind of, as Rachel had option one, and as I said, kind of option two, we haven't gotten past that. And I haven't heard any leanings past that.
Yeah, my inclination is that we focus on within the city and let the county do the urban growth boundary in Pickens County, but spend our money in the city. But the end result is that we need to give subsidy to the early childhood educators' wages.
Thank you. Did you have comment?
I have questions, but John I think maybe had a comment.
Questions are always good. John?
More of a comment. I agree with Ward. It would be nice to be partners with the county, but I think having expectations from the county we're probably barking up the wrong tree. I like Tori's proposal. I think that is what I can throw my support behind.
Questions now, or you want to?
No, go for it.
Yeah, just kind of a thought on a clarification here, because I do like your idea, Tori. The county will be distributing this beneficial wage enhancement as the terms they've put forward, but those providers will still be getting their ongoing subsidy from Kids First? And if so, it would seem that we could make it a condition of getting the base subsidy from Kids First to partner with the counties, not tuition enhancement from us, require the tuition increase to cover that. So we might have a different lever, is what I'm saying, is that rather than, oh, if you want this wage enhancement money, you have to work on a tuition improvement program over a 5-year period, we could say, well, if you want the Kids First base funding that you get already without wage enhancement, you also have to move forward on a tuition enhancement program. So maybe it doesn't have to be just tied to the wage enhancement dollars one way or the other. So that's just the thought. And then the second is I would really wonder and need to know, was the county's federal money that came through, did it have the strings attached from the feds that it has to go to childcare, or could a future BOCC change its direction I'm sorry, we're suspending that program, we're going to put it into this now, we're going to put it into that now. Are they going to give these agencies a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract? Or, can that money be used in other county needs? And so is it really something that's going to be a long-term lifeline for these agencies? But I do think we might be able to use the other revenues that we supply to child care providers to ask them to also sign on to the tuition enhancement program.
Do you have any comments on that, Sarah?
It's certainly
one of those.
an option. It is a different way to administer Kid First funds from the traditional core program, to put that level of, I would say, requirement for the tuition increase. I think what we really want to see is the business practices improve.
Right. I
And
agree.
therefore, we understand at least the cost of service. Right now, cost of service is a very difficult number for a lot of these providers in Pickens County to articulate. We have one provider, I think, who does it fairly well, and I've reviewed her books with her, and that's been very, very valuable to me to understanding what they're experiencing here over COVID and in this current inflationary market. So we could do what Councilmember Richards is proposing. I do want you to know that because these are federal pass-through ARPA funds, yes, the county could redirect them. However, they have to determine and publicly state by resolution and submit. Is it 2024? I believe we have the same requirement for what we chose to put into stormwater. And then it has to be expended by the end of 2026.
Correct, 24 and 26.
Oh, wow.
So it's not going to last long anyhow.
Wow.
So I think that when we talk about, before the council was like pretty aggressive in saying, we want to address this wage piece. We want to take this leadership role in doing it. So if you have an interest in having the county's dollars go first, which is a little bit of a change, I think we just need to be prepared about what that looks like when those dollars run out in 2.5 years, at least for our City of Aspen providers. I think there's a lot of policy questions about being county-wide that deserve a separate conversation that we didn't provide information for you this evening. And we've talked about these previously. You have other jurisdictions, taxing jurisdictions who could potentially be beneficiaries, and is that what you're looking to do? You have families that have the ability to fully finance the cost of their early childhood education needs. Do you want to be adding those funds there or putting them more towards tuition for families that are unable to afford that? And we would love that conversation if you're contemplating countywide for the long term. And I think the other piece with it is I don't think there's a wrong answer here. I want you to know that.
Yeah, that's
okay.
good.
Right now,
That's good.
there's not a wrong answer. Based upon the county's proposal, if you did nothing on wage enhancement, those 40 employees working inside the City of Aspen limits are going to receive $6,000 pay raise next year. The question is, how are we preparing for the end of that money?
Yeah.
And so if you are interested in taking that approach, that gives us some time to have that conversation a little more with the county and see if they are willing to really address the business component. The other alternative is the money we don't spend in wage enhancement, we could start requiring some of this business practice enhancement with. Epic, do we have a proposal from Epic? I forget. Not yet.
No.
So we've looked at bringing this nonprofit to do individual business counseling with the providers who are willing and boards who are willing to go through it. It's intense. I sat through some of it when we went through it at a staff level first. I mean, it gets down to the nitty gritty of what you need to think through when you're opening up a licensed early childhood education center. And I think that's what maybe is a service that has been hard to get on the Western Slope, quite frankly.
Were these tuition increases and were these run by any providers? Have you guys just kind of internally, evaluated the real feasibility and implementation of this over, spreadsheets from Pete are great, but
Yeah, some of the providers have shown some enthusiasm, and other providers are, kind of in a wait and see. What's that going to look like? What is that going to require from us? Some people are a lot more willing to provide financials and to sit down and create that plan and do those practices, which would be, that's a requirement of our wage enhancement, is creating a plan for that tuition increase. And some of them are more hesitant.
So I'm wondering, if we were to make this as an offering, I wonder how many we would actually have say, you know what, we'll just do the county this year and then catch up with you later.
Which is one of my concerns, when you offer free money and you offer money with strings attached,
Yeah.
What are they going to choose? But if we make some choices of moving forward and trying to collaborate in the future, then we eliminate that. We don't make the programs be competitive for the funds.
Yeah.
We don't create immediate investment in learning about the business or accountability or any of those things we want. But the goal of helping what's best for the programs and how it's helping childcare, the county's meeting that goal. We'd like to see it more robust. We would like it not to be a Band-Aid on a broken leg, but, some kind of help in healing the broken leg. And it is potentially giving us time to really invest time and figure out the best use for these funds, that somebody else is willing to pay. I do see a little problem of the competitiveness between the programs. Kids First historically has tried really hard to keep that really level as far as, the geopolitical areas for one reason, so that they weren't competing with each other or they weren't comparing, well, I get this funding from here and you get it from here. One of our goals has always been to maintain a level playing field for everybody, whether you had one classroom or 10 classrooms, whether you had, whether you were in the city or county or whether you were nonprofit or for-profit. Understanding that the bottom line need for these programs is support from us in many different ways, and this is just one of them.
Thank you for that. I think what's been laid out in front of us here for the 5-year within city limits is a very responsible plan. And it just makes me recall, I believe the ELC, whether it was a year ago or what have you, had a grant come through that actually prohibited them doing tuition increases and such. And subsequently, it's landed them in a little bit worse financial position going forward. I think my read on that is correct. But if that's the case, then again, that just lends more credence to kind of our 5-year strategic plan and helping people to recognize how they can make changes to their business models.
Right, but if you worked for a program who was going to participate in the 5-year plan, that would be a lot more attractive than the 3-year plan.
Yep.
And that creates competition. Right? I mean,
Yep.
teachers might want to move from one program to another because they know they're going to be getting the $6,000 for an additional few years.
When the county money runs out, people will leave one provider to go work for a city provider who's still paying them the extra $500 a
Or
month.
before the money runs out, knowing the long game, the city's going to provide this money for 5 or 10 years, but the county's only going to provide it for 3, I might as well go work for this other program.
And get my money now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's how they're setting it up.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's competition between the programs too.
Questions now? Board also has comments if you want to wait some more.
Well, I have a question on, is the county,
Why not?
You're red.
I'm green now. It's Christmas time.
Is that blue?
Is the county going to do part-time teachers, subsidized part-time teachers, or just full-time?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Not sure yet, probably.
Never heard you say that before.
Just said the same thing about
Well, I know.
something going on.
I think their plan looks almost exactly like our plan with a different timeline and without the requirement of the tuition increase.
Just some clarifying questions.
Go ahead.
Sarah, you've expressed, I feel like the tuition piece is a really important one for long-term viability. So is it that the county is like we don't like that plan, that's a bad plan, we won't do it, or they're just not, like, what is their opinion about it?
What I have from reviewing the BOCC work session and my conversation with the county manager's office, there's a view that there is not the relationship with the providers to do quid pro quo giving, which is what ours is. Ours is saying, we know you, we have faith in you, we understand your programs. We also understand we have an ongoing revenue source to pick up the financial aid on the back end for affordability. And the county doesn't have that. So that is part of the reason why they're choosing a benevolent giving model, because when that funding ends, even if they were going to require the tuition increase, they have nothing to contribute to dealing with the financial aid offset for families in need.
So they're not against it, but they just don't have the same sort of.
They don't have a strategy or plan for dealing with when the funding, federal funding runs out.
Okay, and do you think they would be open to, or do we have the ability to compel that piece around tuition for some partial funding of this? And if so, is there a threshold number or percentage that would yield that?
So the Kids First Board does that for us, right? I mean, they set what the maximum financial aid packages are. So it's, what are we up to now? Some crazy number of.
Per family.
How many thousands above the poverty line are we now?
Oh, we're at over 500% above.
Yeah,
poverty.
500% of poverty line, we're providing financial aid right now.
But that's what, Rachel, that's what you were talking about, using that other tool for that
Right,
conversation.
well, that's because, A, the poverty line hasn't been changed in forever. That's why everyone uses percentages of it, and it's still absurd. It'd be nice to, when you do come in next time, bring in those actual numbers, so we can look at what that means for a family income of 1 or 2 or, whatever kids.
I can get it.
Yeah, it's not urgent right now, but, it is always helpful background information when we're talking about who gets subsidized or not.
We didn't bring it today because it really, our questions, you've fully delegated that responsibility of that financial aid package to the Kids First Board to manage its appropriateness of. The Kids First Board has a long history of ensuring that the Kids First tax funds created by this community and the visitors to it, it is not typically benevolent giving. It is definitely quid pro quo because of the intentions of increasing quality, of increasing capacity, of increasing the education levels of staff. There's always something expected in return for that financial contribution back. And that is just something I want to emphasize as part of the Kids First Board takes that responsibility extremely serious and the mandate from when it was first created back in the 90s.
Got it. Okay, so there is that tool there. The relationship piece, I mean, with the sort of sociopath hat on, right, of like, we only look at the numbers, I mean, it makes sense to just give nothing and let them do that. But if we're playing sort of the dictator game here, do we think that there is a contribution in any way that would have a appreciable negative impact on the long-term relationship?
Relationship with whom?
The county.
I really can't speak to that. I think that's something that the electeds need to manage and have a discussion on.
Thanks. Ward, another comment?
Yeah. When is the BOCC going to weigh in on this? Is it on their Wednesday agenda?
I have to confirm when it goes back to the BOCC. I don't have that schedule.
Yeah, I don't know.
Can we talk to them about it? I mean, it feels kind of crazy not to.
We have.
You have, yeah.
We have.
So can you share with me what I should know from those conversations then? So
I think Sarah's just always said it.
I said it earlier, and Sarah said it. It's exactly what we just shared with you, is that they have come up with a program that they can administer for about 2.5 years. They've said that we could give them money to continue it beyond that. But again, it would go through a third, anyway. We talk about collaboration and partnership, and it sounds like really the opportunity for us to do that is kind of the scenario that I was drawing out about the city limits and 5 years. And
we own our piece, they own their piece, we A/B test.
Yes, and it gives us a little more time to be working with the county to see if there are long range, but they don't have funding tools. They don't have a funding tool for this. So this goes back to, looking to proper a countywide tax of some sort or some revenue stream, but right now they don't have it.
Yeah.
So, Ward was going to finish up and then back to Rachel.
Yeah, I think if we concentrate our money within the city limits and that we perhaps fund at half level, the county picks up the other half level, and then we could still have a requirement for tuition enhancing to receive the $250 a month. The county has $250 a month that they have no strings attached to.
But is that the case?
If they wanted to play it that way.
That's what's been indicated, is that there is no strings attached. If we fund, they're going to decrease funding to that amount. That they're willing to fund $6,000 a year, but if we fund $3,000, they're going to drop theirs to $3,000.
That's clear to me. What's not clear to me is if for half of a investment, we can compel the change in behavior around the tuition, and if we can't compel it, are the organizations just going to say, actually, we don't want your half of the money with that, and we'll just take it from over here? That's what's not clear to me.
That is very likely a behavior we could see is that.
But they could also do that if we offer the full amount, right?
The difference is the timeline. The difference is that money's going to be there for 2.5.
I see.
This Kids First recommendation is for 10 years.
I see.
The staff recommendation is here, so what 5 looks like. So the net amount is higher with the city program than the county, but it comes with the tuition increase. That's really the difference.
I feel like I'm in a university experiment about money spending right now.
All right, Rachel's comments, and then let's see if we can bring this back and wrap this one up.
First off, I don't see this in our proposals, but you had mentioned it, Sarah, and so I do think it should be added on, and that is to create a contract with Epic to come up and start developing business plans and better business models for our childcare providers. So whatever amount that contract needs to be, I think we need to do that. That's obvious in this. The second is I would like to have the Kids First mull over that potential change of policy for the base funding that comes out of the existing sales tax that's not part of the wage enhancement, to say to the providers who are not going to be within our wage enhancement program, who are going to be doing this, that your base or part of the base is now going to be contingent upon a tuition model that will, in fact, backfill the county money once it's gone. And I think that we do have a leverage point, and we should consider using it and try to have, but when we talk about unfair competition, I don't want provider on one side of the line, I don't have to do this reporting or auditing or anything. I just get the money. And then on this side, we're improving our business model. We're going to be in a sustainable business mode in 5 years, and we're using this financial assistance to get us there. And yet, this is all add-on money to the base money that comes from the sales tax and Kids First to support families and the individuals. So I think, what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander, and we need to find a way to have that requirement work for all the providers in the community. And then it takes away that issue of, well, which program is requiring this from us and which one isn't, as a choice. Maybe the longer-term financial would make a difference to some workers as to where they want to stay. But, if we get to this really adequate situation with funding through the tuition being appropriate to the cost of running the programs at some level, we may end up with additional funds to be able to continue doing things like this. And so that's where I am. I just think for some way there has to be a level playing field across these programs. And if we need to make it a new requirement on the base funding that we allocate annually, then I think that's where it needs to come down. Or it needs to come down through the families that receive our support ongoing. Are they going to a provider who is also on this program? One way or the other, that needs to just happen. Thank you.
Rachel is making a suggestion that needs some council support or non-support here. I
was suggesting it goes back to the Kids First Board to discuss it.
Okay, great. That's better sense. I can agree with that. I think it needs some more fleshing out, some more work, because I don't know if it's even going to be how it's going to be received, how it's going to be. But yes, I can support that going forward for more information, without a doubt. Another comment, and then I want to get to some wrap up here.
I was going to give a wrap-up comment. Can I do that? I've only asked questions. I haven't said a thing about my opinion on any of this.
Sure. Go for it.
Yeah. I think on balance, doing all of the funding from within the city and asking for the change to the tuition is where I would fall. I think there's a good incentive with the additional timeline to do that. I think it provides a little bit of an A/B scenario to look at, kind of what's working for the health of the system. And I just say, it's disappointing to me that that's the approach I sort of feel forced to take, where it's like, I don't know if I could, going to the Board of County Commissioners and say, hey, if we helped you stretch your dollars, we could also bring in the opportunity to do holistically better planning for the system. I don't know what they would say, and that feels to me like an opportunity for some better communication. So I just like to open that up from myself and our table for that. If there's a receptive partner on the other side, I think there's a good opportunity there. So I would do that. Rachel, to your suggestion, I think it's an interesting one, and I would certainly ask the Kids First Board to talk about it. My concern that I'd want them to talk about is, like, in this instance, it sort of makes clear sense, right? Like to realign cost of delivery, knowing that there's a backfill and wanting people to pay their own wage with the wage disparity and income disparity we have in our community. The concern is that it opens a sort of a precedential window for the increasing creep of requirements from a board that is, or not just a board, but from us who are one or two levels separated from the actual care. And could that over time become a problem? And so I'd want them to sort of think through that. I don't have an answer to it, but that would be sort of my concern as we like pile on things that are requirements that actually may make it harder to operate, just not out of any malice, but just from being a level detached. So that's my concern that I'd want them to think through.
All right. Just us having this conversation this evening is going to be informative as the county continues their talks. So all of this will be getting back to them and will be something that I'm sure that they're going to use for consideration at some level. At what level? I don't know. Okay, so on this one piece of tonight's work session, we are looking at support. The answer is yes, wage enhancement funding. Current tact on it is the budget as it's depicted on the screen. Right now, we are talking about city limits, and we were talking about a 5-year. It's kind of where the conversation was. But around that, there were some other ideas. And the big one, I mean, the blanket one is, we're looking to partner and collaborate and work with county. And that goes for both what Rachel's saying about ways to get other people to take advantage of the offer for long-term planning and help, as well as what Skippy talks about and just saying like, hey, if there's another way for partnership that gets that moving forward, we are open to hear that. But those are the basics. Do you need anything else on these items?
I don't think so. I think, I guess what I'm hearing from you is, yes, we want to support the wage enhancement, grant funding probably around the 5-year limit just within the city, and then talk with the advisory board, and then also figure out ways to collaborate with the county.
Pretty much,
That's it.
yeah.
And the last thing is the business education component, which is something you already funded in your approved budget.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
Great.
All
Awesome.
right, let's move on to the rent elimination question, I think is next.
Yes. Okay, so basically, our question for you is, do you want to consider this as a pilot program for 1 year, providing free rent to the childcare providers in the Yellow Brick for 1 year, or do you want it to be an ongoing subsidy? So that's kind of the question for you. Programs will still be expected to pay for utilities and, of course, be mindful of the resources such as water, gas, electricity, and trash services. So that's the question. Is it a year-long pilot program, or is it an ongoing subsidy?
Thanks.
Thank you. As I looked at this, I thought I'd like to do a 2-year pilot program so that there's a little time to really see how it shakes out and makes a difference in the budget and the operations of the organization. I would not commit to a long-term funding at this point. I think you may get to a point where you back it back in at some level of rent, but not this. But as I said earlier, I think the most important thing is to see how does the reduction in rent translate into wages for the workers, facilities for the workers, other costs in the budget, but not just kind of disappears because we suddenly, that they've developed better capital reserves or operating reserves, everything like that. So that would be the only string I would put on it, is to see how it really ends up being used. But I would not make the decision at this point to say it's permanent. And I think that with this board or future boards are going to continue to need to look at housing to actually house, to finally contain those costs for childcare workers. And the rent may pay a small part of that, but I don't know. So that's where I'm at.
Is there any discussion around that, Sarah? Maybe I'll look at you. 1 year versus 2 versus ongoing.
I would encourage you, because we're trying to move these leases for predictability to 3-year leases.
Oh, okay.
And that you would do, if you choose to do a pilot, it be that 3 years, and that we make it a commitment by after 20, within about a 10-month or so time frame before a renewal, that we notify if there will be a rent. So you can take an examination of the books for 2 years first. So for example, Mountain Tots, what you just approved, was a 3-year rent waiver when it came through. Ajax Cubs, when it comes through on your agenda tomorrow, does have a rent requirement in it right now. And then, of course, ELC also, we anticipated a conversation around some kind of rent waiver for a period of time as they're rebalancing their books.
So you're saying that not even 1 year, you would minimum of...
You have already made a legal obligation for 3 years to one of these providers. I would encourage you to treat them the same in the building.
I'll go 3 year.
I have 3, can I get a 4?
All right. Any opposing comments here or any further questions?
Not opposing. I'm comfortable with that. I think as I've learned more about the sort of norm of that, it's fine to me. But I do want to have further thought about the relationship between asking people to raise their rates to the actual cost and then taking a significant cost out the door. And are we kind of sort of fighting our own equation there, and how those things intersect? I just want to be thinking about that.
I think that all of us are in a learning process here. As I asked earlier on the last topic, where do we see this done other places, and what's the model that we're following? How does this play out? Same thing with this, last thing that we all want to do is find ourselves in what sounds now like possibly a 3-year agreement, that after 3 years, we're like, we can't afford the $150,000 a year. We need to reinstate it, and yet we've put our providers in a position where they are accustomed to this, and now they're like, oh, I'm going to operate at a huge loss this year, et cetera. Diane just took a seat up at the table.
I did, and I'm pretty certain, I'm looking at Nancy, I'm pretty certain in Dawn's lease, it was a 3-year lease, and went to 4 days a week, but did not actually waive the rent for those 3 years. I will say, I completely agree with Sarah. If you think about somebody operating a business, them having that time to be able to kind of work through what can they do that will benefit the organization with the extra money, et cetera. It's a much better planning horizon. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So we're going to pull up that, Nancy, are you sure we are charging the $11,000 a year base rent to Aspen Mountain Tots?
After starting next year, or this year, yeah. This year's lease through August, and then the new lease from then, I believe the rent amount was in there. I think our intent was that this was going to be a grant or a different kind of incentive program. Originally, we were going to include it in the leases, but since Aspen Mountain Tots lease went forward, we were going to come in the backside with a grant or an incentive for their lease. The lease we're presenting tomorrow for Ajax Cubs has rent in it. And ELC's lease is currently only through September of 2023, August of 2023.
So I apologize. This is important information we should have had clarified for your packet for today. And I understand if you're not prepared to answer this question because we should bring you back complete information. And I feel like at the staff level, we don't quite have ourselves on the same page for this discussion, let alone to ask you to make a decision.
Okay,
We could discuss this tomorrow night after the regular meeting.
Okay, and we can add it to next Monday's work session real quick, too.
and Ward?
Yeah, I can support this, but I want to know the granular details of where the money goes, how it benefits, how it affects the program. And, you look at a pro forma to make a business work. I think 3 years is a reasonable period of time for whatever we do.
Thanks, Ward. All right, we will come back to this as a topic. I'll just put in my 2 cents right now. I'm all for a pilot of 1 year, and during that year, we can kind of figure out where we're going for future direction, but
We'll circle back around on next Monday.
we'll discuss it again.
It is, okay.
We need to have a conversation at the staff level.
Thank you, though. All right,
Okay.
Before we totally leave, I just want to say, it does make sense to me, the way Nancy has presented this, that if the rent is in the lease, people know it's there, but it's being waived and we're contributing to it, as opposed to having leases written with no rent, and then council finding maybe in year 3, they can't afford it. So I at least like this approach, that it's in the rent, and they know what they're being subsidized, and then if it changes at some future time, it's already in the lease.
I agree.
Yeah.
all right, we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
And now you got some entryway questions for us.
Yep. We just have the ask of City Council to price out and include a snow melt system to our capital project for the yellow brick entry. So what was included here was a bid from Bishop Plumbing, and it includes a hydronic system and 2 new small boilers that would be electric, that would run the system, one at each end of the building, the melt system. And so what we're asking is if this is something that we can request additional funding for. The bid was for approximately $55,000 with a contingency of $25,000 for additional electric work or overriding. So the ask is for approval of $80,000 to install snow melt in the 2 entries while we're redoing the entries, which was already an approved capital project. And the Kids First Board strongly supports this and feels that it would do great things for the safety and security of families coming and going from the building, carrying small children, and the future of just the asset that we have at the Yellow Brick.
Were those rubber electric heat mats considered at all?
They were not.
Okay.
I would suggest that this system is much more efficient than those heat mats. And the reason being is the labor involved in maintaining the heat mats compared to maintaining the system, not necessarily the electrical usage. But this one is an annual boiler maintenance program compared to the daily checks that are required on the mat systems.
Just, for, how we just keep going backwards on this item. We talk in this town all the time about no snow melt, and then we put it in certain places, and we put it in certain places, and
So these are electric boilers. This was one of the things in the past conversations. It hasn't been necessarily no snow mount. It has been snow mount using natural gas has been
very true.
Been the sticking point. So that's why staff has bid this out to be on the 100% renewable energy grid.
I
For
appreciate
your
that.
consideration. We didn't even bother bidding out the natural gas option.
Thank you.
Have we seen an operational costs for this, the ongoing expenses for that? And is this a supplemental for spring, or where?
The technical would be, we would do an additional appropriations, yes. And I doubt that there's a ton of maintenance, annual maintenance costs. Nancy, do you have any? Is it just normal
don't-
inspections? Probably on the
Correct.
boilers, like the other boilers in the building?
Correct, just being inspected. I mean, the cost is going to be the daily cost based on 70 average days of snow a year, at a cost of the electricity.
Yeah, that's what I
So
wanted is.
we figured about $80 to operate the snow melt system.
I know when we looked at replacing boilers with natural gas versus electric, that the energy costs for electric were astronomical compared to natural gas.
Sounds like they've pared this one down. Anyway, more questions, comments, suggestions?
I'm supportive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to see the details, but this would be for summer construction.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
My regular frustration with snow melt is beyond just the environmental concern. I still feel like we're a ski town, and we should walk on snow. But I continue to make reluctant decisions against that inclination on the basis of safety. I don't know.
Here's another one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just frustrating, and it's like, what's the choice? Like, either that or we use a bunch of chemicals and we salt anyway. So it's not like the option is we're actually going to keep the snow and all of that, but I wish we would.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. We have the salt.
I know it, and it's
John?
just I'm being salty is what I'm being.
I think I share the frustration with snow melt. Frustration is probably the wrong word, but just feeling that we're going the wrong direction with this. On the other hand, this is about safety for our kids and their parents, and at least it's not a big driveway to a 15,000 square foot house that's being heated for people that never come.
At least. All right. There is support at the table, request for more details.
I would like to see a comparison with natural gas.
Do you mean operating cost or capital cost? Because we'll try to find someone who's willing to bid that for us. If we know we're not going that way, we try not to engage the bidder's time.
When we looked at the library, which is not a city project, but we looked at, I think, the yellow brick and the red brick, both. We compared natural gas and electric for ongoing expenses, and the natural gas was 95% efficient, and the operational costs are like a fifth of what they were for electric. So I want to see those numbers where they are now.
I have a challenge with that, Ward, just because we're looking just at the very end product, once it's in our yellow brick and potentially bringing natural gas because it's less expensive. But they've just spotted this huge methane plume coming out of the fields in New Mexico to get the natural gas. And so, it might be clean natural gas by the time it gets into your house and you're burning it, that doesn't mean the extraction and the piping and all those other processes are all that clean. And I just want to say, I mean, I feel like we've spec'd out electric because we've been trying to go more all electric and not have the cost number be the big number or the big issue. I mean, we could have bought new police cars that were gasoline police cars, and they would have been a lot less expensive than the electric Teslas. But we're trying to move to...
Natural gas is in the building already.
Yeah, I know, but are we going to continue to use it? And I'm looking at a difference between a building that you're going to have to heat all the time. I mean, you have to heat that building when it gets down to 50 degrees, but you don't have to run the snow melt when it's only 50 degrees. You only run the snow melt when it's super low. So, you know, I just have a concern about creating more demand for natural gas fields in New Mexico. And at some level, that's what we'd be doing.
And what is your request for that information is something that is going to guide your decision on this, or are you just kind of looking at it for comparison's sake and such?
I know the previous consoles, when we looked at replacing boilers, we decided to stay with the 95% efficient natural gas because the expense was a real key to it. Now, if this council doesn't want to consider that, I'm still fiscally responsible, and I want to look at what it costs over a long period of time for operation. And when I mean operational, I mean energy costs as well, because that natural gas is already in the building. The boiler is natural gas, and I appreciate that that greenhouse gas is one of our top 3 priorities, and climate change is built into that greenhouse gas. But I want to, if it's $80,000 and the electricity is going to be $8 a day, I want to know how that compares to what, maybe we have the boiler that's big enough already that we don't need to increase it. I don't know. I'm being presented with something and I have no comparison. So of course, I can support snow melt for the safety of the children, but I want, Scott might be going to pipe in here.
Well, rough order of magnitude, I don't have actual numbers. Rough order of magnitude, the gas boilers will be similar to this, maybe a little cheaper, but the operational cost for natural gas is about 1/5 of electric.
Yeah, that's what I recall.
Yep.
What's that over the course of a year, roughly?
I'm sorry, what?
What's like the number?
$70 versus $350
Per
year. 70 days of snow melt possibility, $8 a day. Oops, I messed up my math. It's $8 a day. It is $120 versus $540.
Got it. Okay.
And if we're talking about costs, we have labor costs and stuff for shoveling snow now also. That's not the environmental direction you're taking. But if we're concerned about the cost, we currently have costs for snow removal daily, and it could very easily be $80 a day, if not more.
I just want to hear, you're saying 80, just.
80.
Yes, 0. Okay, so make sure you heard that.
80 per day.
Times
5, so $350 per day additionally?
No, $350 per season for
Per
the
season.
energy costs.
Got it, per season. Okay. I appreciate your,
Add a 0.
It's $5,600 for 70 days of operation a year for the energy cost is the estimate for an electric choice.
okay,
For electric and 1/5 of that for gas.
got it.
If I divide that by 5, you can expect between 1,100 and 1,200 if you chose a natural gas option.
So I think that there's more out of this that, Ward is getting to a little bit more about even policy decisions going forward. It's not even so much about this one project as it is just overall overarching environmental balance and questions. So I think maybe we can get some more information. Scott can probably get into that pretty quickly. I don't know if it needs to be the scoping of just this project as it is really, you're talking about a philosophical approach to policy. So maybe there's more that we need to learn about that.
Well, I think Ward was talking, I'm not putting any words in your mouth, but, you were mentioning that it's already on site at this location. So I heard it as site-specific, not that it couldn't be in other places. I appreciate the thought process, and I think it's a good thing to question here, but hearing it's a couple $1,000s, I'd rather go with the electric. If we were going to be respending half of the rent we're giving up, that might be a different question. But I think I'm comfortable with that. And as long as we're playing annoying devil's advocate, I would just call into question that we're actually creating more safety for the kids. We might be more reducing falls in this space, but we may actually be inhibiting their learning on how to walk in snow, which could cause. This is like when we removed peanuts from the classroom and we said all the kids are going to be safe from the peanuts, but what happened? Peanut allergies spiked tremendously and the kids ended up being less safe at the end of the day.
You know what? It's just like that. Okay, we are interested in more information. However, this is supported at council table.
So to clarify, we can go forward with the $80,000 supplemental for this project, which you'll see in spring of 2023, but we are going to go forward with the electric boilers at this building.
Yes.
Okay.
I want a number, I want a comparison.
Yeah,
I see a majority of council wanting to move forward with the recommendation on the slide now.
It's correct.
Okay.
It is correct. He would like more information, though.
Well, if it's, I'm a lone voice in the wilderness, forget it.
Well, your question should be answered regardless. I mean, your curiosity, again, is not just about this. You want to better understand, how this plays out. So I think that's beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, we looked at it for the new boilers, and the library's looking at it, although it's not our project, but they decided to hold off on it.
Yeah.
And they also decided that perhaps they don't need snow melt around the library.
And for me, again, when it comes to this project, I'm going to go with electric. I'm probably going to go with electric as much as I can, always. And will I ever want to be approving any natural gas? Probably not. But it doesn't hurt to have the information.
Yeah, and I'm not supporting natural gas for ornamental heating.
Okay. We have one more
Thing.
biggie.
That's it.
Got it. Those are answered.
That's it. So
Yes.
do we want a summary of what we've talked about, or are we good?
I think I've got it good, one
We got
and
'em as we were
three,
going.
and then we'll have a conversation offline tomorrow to prep for Monday on 2.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you all for your time.
Great to see you too.
Good to see you. Thanks.
We have one more item.
Burlingame Early
Burlingame Childcare Center.
Little ditty.
We've got Jen Phelan, that's what we've got.
So, yep, go right ahead. If anybody needs a quick walkout, go for it now. We'll get switched over. Yep. Take a stretch. We're not going to take a break. We'll just keep it going, Amy. That's fine. I will look for show tunes on my phone, and we can tell people how great GrassRoots TV is, and we appreciate them watching. And we're just getting switched over to another presentation.
I watched when it was time to stand.
Yeah, over it.
Glasses on, glasses on, glasses on, glasses on. And then they put the lens in, if you look at one part, you can see it. Then you have to train yourself. Doesn't work for monocular vision.
said, I know. He got held hostage. I guess his housing. I guess they don't read the newspapers. Still.
I heard something about that, okay. Not a physical. All right, we are back in room. It's 6:35, and we are picking up with our last agenda item. This is the Burlingame Early Childhood Education Center.
Okay, sorry, we are just, maybe as a panelist so that I can share my screen and get a PowerPoint presentation going for you. Okay. Shoot. Can't I see my notes? Okay, well, we'll go for it. I don't see my notes, but I have them written here too. I knew this would happen to me. All right, thank you, Mayor and City Council. My name's Jen Phelan. I'm a development manager with the Asset Department. I'm here present in council chambers, but we have a number of consultants who are remote this evening. So also joining this evening online is Andy Korber of Land and Shelter, Alan Ford of Alan Ford Architects, Ed Bugelwitz of RDG Planning and Design, and Rob Schober is also attending remotely this evening. So they might be interjecting through part of this presentation. So tonight we are going to be talking about the Burlingame Early Childhood Education Center, and we're going to be reviewing the schematic design that has been developed. So, our request for council tonight is to review the schematic design. We'll be going over the progression of the hillside concept to schematic. The hillside concept is before you on the screen. And we'll also be looking at requesting feedback and direction on the design and next steps of this project. We'll be providing information that council requested at the last work session we had on this project in August. And I'll be requesting support of a change order with regard to this design contract this evening. All right, with regard to background, just for audience and just a little reminder of where we've come from, increasing childcare capacity is a council goal, and Burlingame Early Childhood Education Center has the ability to progress that goal and create a new facility with additional classrooms for childcare in the valley. This site, which you can see, is comprised of 3 parcels, and it's just over an acre of land. The city sent out a RFP on this project, and we selected Land and Shelter as the design firm to lead this project. And the scope for this project includes a early childhood education center and a component of housing. So a little more on the background. What you see before you image-wise is the schematic site plan. At the beginning of this project, we had multiple iterations of design concepts that were based on multiple meetings with an executive committee of staff, city staff, a expanded design advisory group that had representation from Kids First, from the Pitkin County, from a property owner in Burlingame, as well as other providers of childcare services in the valley. We also did a fair amount of outreach with the Burlingame neighborhood and broader community that helped inform the design of this project. Concepts were refined down to two, what we called hillside and street side, and we brought those two ideas to council in August. Basically, the difference between them was that hillside provided two buildings, a childcare center and a separate housing building, while the street side incorporated all of those uses in one building. At the end of the August work session, council, agreeing with staff, agreed that the hillside concept, the one right here, was the one to move forward to schematic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the components of the schematic design, and I guess if the consultants want to add anything after I talk about each component, just let us know.
Do you know how long this presentation is? And I ask that because the questions here are somewhat basic, and I don't know how much detail we need about the design that's there, but.
I can make it fast if you want me to.
No, I'm just wondering if you had any idea.
I have 12 slides, and we're on number 5.
Great, thank you.
How's that? Okay. All right, schematic design. The Early Childhood Education Center includes 7 classrooms, a gross motor room, administration space, entry requirements, circulation, storage, and support space, as well as 3 distinct outdoor play areas for each age group that this building can accommodate. The building is essentially a 2-story building. It does have a small basement crawl, but it's 2 stories that works with the topography. There's a pretty big hill on this site, so the building steps up on the hillside and also is built into the hillside. This is just some 3Ds of the center. Daylighting was really important to the design of this building, being energy efficient, important. You can see a little bit of parking on one of the 3D renderings. We have parking that can be developed with up to 42 spaces on site. Some is proposed to be covered again to accommodate for solar on site. Access to this building is from Harmony Drive. And then on the other parcels, lots 3 and 4, the multifamily housing is proposed. This is a 3-story building. It's very similar in scale and height of other buildings being built in Burlingame 3 with regard to multifamily development. The first floor, the ground floor is parking as well as some storage. And then on the second and third story, you have 3 dwelling units, 1 1-bedroom, and 3 2-bedrooms. And here's some renderings of the schematic design. Again, you can see the rendering of Burlingame 3 next door, so similar in scale and style, but still working with the early education, I'm going to just call it the ECE Center. All right. Are there any questions on the housing that I can help with right now? Or
Yeah.
the consultants?
Is the housing that you just represented to us, is that the already approved number, or is that two more than the approved number?
It's two more than the approved number. The current 2 lots are approved for a single-family house on each, so that's 2 dwelling units. This is proposing 4 multifamily uses, so the use is a little different, and a increase of 2 units.
Which would have to go to a vote of, thank you.
Correct.
Go to the HOA?
Yes.
Unanimous, right?
That is what is currently written, yes.
Sure, you have a question on the housing?
Yeah, I do. You mentioned beginning to engage with the HOA. How? You mentioned beginning to engage with the HOA, and I'm wondering what the initial reception was to this piece.
We haven't done that. In the memo that was provided, it does talk about our first step would be to approach the master HOA to get a feeling of how that would go over.
Got it.
All right, should I move on to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so at Conceptual, we had some high-level cost estimates. And for Hillside, it was just over $20 million with escalation costs. Since moving on to schematics, the cost estimates have been revised. What we were looking at is some of the changes in the design where some add alternates, some things that weren't in the original concept were added, and most of those were I'd say green related, being an efficient building related. And so we have a range of costs that was provided by our estimator, with a low of about $26 million for all components of the project, up to a high of 29. His suggestion was to use the mid cost of about just under $28 million. And we did try and break this out just by element, so you have a better idea of how much the childcare center would cost compared to the housing, the site work, and cost escalation over time. So as I said, this provides a range of numbers, and if we move forward, we can look at council's priorities for the buildings and any trade-offs you're willing to consider, and look at how that can guide at refining and value engineering, if needed, these buildings.
Yep, Rachel.
A question. So I understand what you were just saying there. Do we have to make those choices before you can submit schematics for entitlements? Or are those choices that the council can make, or future councils can make later?
I think what we'd want to be looking at is what are important components to the project as it moves forward. We can, the more you change the design over the time, you add costs to it. So,
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering how detailed we need to get to be for schematic. I mean, to go forward with entitlements.
I think it's something that we don't necessarily need for land use entitlements, but we should be working towards at the same time to develop that information and create that path for the design development.
Thank you.
So maybe you could remind the council of what level of entitlement's actually required, because this is a conditional use already on the parcel.
We've asked for a pre-app from ComDev. The The childcare component actually is a pretty relatively, I'd say, simple approval that it goes straight back to council. It's a one-step approval to amend the PD and basically set all the dimensions of the childcare. The more complicated aspect potentially is the housing.
I know that. But can we get them entitled separately? Because they're
That's
separate
something I
lots.
was going to talk about towards the end of this. But yes, there's, depending on how you decide to go forward with this project, I think there's the ability to concurrently handle both components if you were inclined to go that way, so that one part does not necessarily hold up another part if we get a couple bumps in the road. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. At the August work session, you asked about what the initial staffing needs for this building would be, and based on information from Kids First, it looks like it's 3 staff per classroom and about an additional 3 staff for the rest of the building, so you're looking at 24 staff people if you have 7 classrooms. And then there was also questions on what is the need, the capacity needs for additional childcare in the Valley. Kids First has been working with 6 operators in Pickens County and gathering data since their software platform's not up yet, to actually have this in a more digital form. And it indicates that there's a wait list of 110 to 525 children. And the reason that you've got this broad amount is because at the low end, we've assumed there's overlap in every wait list for every classroom of that age group.
So yeah, I was trying to figure that out in the packet. So the 110 number is the maximum number of potential overlap it could be. So
Right.
somewhere in
So
between
if-
is almost certainly where it is, but we just don't.
And if,
Got it.
so basically, if you have 5 existing classrooms for for toddlers, and you divide that for that total number that they have, assuming that each one is on every wait list for those 5 classes, that's where you get the lower end number.
Right. Got
And
it.
then the higher end is assuming each child is an individual, unique on only one wait list.
And as far as sort of time stamping this, presumably people got on those wait lists before we lost space at the Yellow Brick, during, and now, so we don't really know how that relates to the fact that there will be, like you said, 98 potential spots becoming available, because these may or may not have been at a time when those existed to some degree. Is that right? Saying nodding head from the back. For the
Yes,
record, I'm saying it.
this is above my knowledge
Got it.
base, sorry.
This data, we made phone calls as
Okay.
recent as 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And that's where this data is from. So this is what is currently
On the
on
list.
those 5 providers' wait lists.
But when those people signed up, who knows? They could have been on for
Correct.
some time.
Correct.
Okay.
And then doing the math of how many students can be in any one classroom based on the category, age category, that 110 to 525 children basically translates to 11 to about 50 classrooms. So that's the information we have on capacity needs at the moment.
Yeah. Great.
And then the other item that was discussed in August was the density cap at Burlingame. This kind of just highlights what was in the memo, but the current allowance is for 256 units. That was a 20-unit increase in 2009. That was approved by the Burlingame homeowners, with the city participating in that negotiation. One of the changes to the declarations that happened in 2009 is what was mentioned by a council member, is that the declarations were amended to say that any future changes on density would need to be approved by 100% of the homeowners. Right now, there's 177 homeowners because there's 177 units online. And Burlingame Phase 3 is under construction. So what we'd be looking at is approaching the master HOA, seeing what interest there is to increase that cap, and having discussions on that, because the declarations would need to be amended again, and we would then, based on how that would go, then have a vote. But Jim can talk about this a little bit too.
Well, so it's clear, I believe prior to 2009, the declarations had that 100% requirement for increasing density. You can amend the declarations with a less than 100%. And what we did was amend the declarations to lower that percentage, but it was limited in time. So once this increased number back then in 2000 was approved, then the 100% requirement was reinstated. You could do that or propose that again. But I would remind everybody that in order to increase that, there was a lot of negotiation with the homeowners association.
There was a
and
little
benefits
boot added,
provided.
wasn't there?
Sure.
There were benefits provided in exchange for making that increase.
100% is pretty tough. Might be worth it.
All right. Well, you said that well. So that was the information that you had asked us to bring back at this work session. One additional item that I've put on this work session is the need for a change order. The contract that we set up with Land and Shelter has a square footage allowance for the site. And in working out the programming for this project, it's greater than what was anticipated in the contract. So we're basically, that represents additional work beyond the scope. So we've negotiated a dollar amount of just about $87,000 in the form of a change order to cover this expanded scope. And I just want to point out that because it is an expanded scope, we'd probably be needing to look at the rest of other phases in the future because the building's bigger than what we had planned on originally.
So originally, the scope was for 12,000 square feet. It is now somewhere around 18,000 square feet, a little bit more perhaps.
Correct.
Was this change order work already completed as part of this schematic, or this would be a change order going forward?
This is part of the schematic. This is for getting to schematic based on this increased size of building.
So we've already been delivered the increased scope?
It was good faith work.
Okay.
So what we'd need to be looking at is moving forward. What does that look like?
How do we get from 12,000 to 18,000?
So originally, there was a very high-level floor plan. I mean, it was basically massing, looking at what could fit on the site, and it had some basic numbers in there. So we used that in the RFP as the basis of the size of the childcare. And in furthering the discussion about programming, it increased in size.
So the 18K is for the center plus the housing or just the center?
Center plus housing.
Now, what is the square footage of the housing?
So the housing, the conditioned space is, I want to say about 5,400 square feet. And then you've got, I want to say about 13,500 for the conditioned space in the childcare, or in the ECE center.
Do you have more slides?
Yeah. Yes. Well, are there any questions now? Because the next two slides are basically, or this might be the last slide, actually. This is the last slide, is next steps and where do we want to go?
Are there any questions on what you've seen to this point? Then we'll start talking about these questions. Rachel?
The only question I have was, where would you propose the additional funding for design come from? Is that general fund? Is that childcare fund?
The Kids First Fund, this project is wholly within the Kids First Fund.
Okay, that's what I thought, but thank you.
And there is more than sufficient fund balance.
Yeah, but with the 87,000, if I remember the number right from the last slide, and you're saying to complete the additional work will probably be more going forward as well? Do you
Well,
have any sort of range?
No, because I don't know where we want to go, so I think basically it's.
Well, if it's the old goal of getting through entitlements, what additional costs?
We're going to have that conversation and come back to you. Because, we set up the contract so that it was either basically the housing and the childcare, and then a different track that was just childcare. And so there were two different costs, and we've got a larger scope. So depending on where you want to go, I think we're going to be circling back and talking so that we can come back with updated information to you.
Okay, well, given that the housing is a much longer conversation that's going to happen, I would think about going ahead and separating the two and getting them improved separately with the entitlements. I think we've already talked about not moving forward construction because we don't have the funds for that. But I would see no reason to not to bifurcate them at this point. And get some idea what it will cost to finish just the one through entitlement.
I'm going to go ahead and share my thoughts, and as others get their thoughts together. I guess my first question is, I see 18,000 square feet, around $27 million, comes out to about $1,500 a square foot build. I look over at Scott and I say, is that, does that pencil out? Is that what we're looking at these days for this kind of facility build?
I think so, looking at the design, I think.
Come on up.
We're at about 1,200 per square foot with real basic construction today. By the time we would get this designed and entitled, I can see how we're at 1,500.
Okay, thank you for that. So for me, Council, I am really happy that we've gotten this to schematic. I'm not interested at this time myself to develop the construction documents. I didn't anticipate 18,000 square feet here. I think the access road is difficult for putting childcare here. I think we have an opportunity perhaps at the lumberyard. I would, if there's 18,000 square feet to work with here, and we were going to have to go to the master HOA, I would want to utilize more of that for housing and a smaller footprint for the ECE. I have a lot of questions about this being the right place, about this being the right time, about this being the right build. So for me, I am glad that we have this ready. At our last meeting where we talked about this, that was my support, was to get this to a place where we could be more ready for possible funding from other sources. But right now, this project is not necessarily checking the boxes for me. So I'm really happy that we've done this research. I'm really surprised that it's 18,000 square feet instead of 12. And like I said, if that was the case, I'd probably look, if I was going to go to the HOA for housing, I would go for more housing and less childcare facility at this location. I think that's kind of my comments. Skippy.
Cool. I appreciate it. Little further along, but kind of similar conclusion. I do want to see this continue to move forward, but I want to see more complete information and more engagement with the HOA. I don't have the concern about square footage. If we're going to do something, let's do something that's going to last, and I think the designs are really great. I greatly appreciate staff trying to bringing the best data that we have forward and making that current. But we're still pretty shooting in the dark in terms of demand. And even if we weren't on that, in terms of the availability of teachers to staff it, we know that that's a significant hurdle. So I, like you, Troy, think if we're going to ask for something from the HOA, I'd rather ask for more, and maybe we get back to here. But I'd love to engage them about the housing and see if there is the opportunity for more. When BG3 comes online, I'll be bidding, I imagine, as a future parent there. I would want more, with the expectation that those rooms for my kids would have teachers that live next door and weren't driving from Rifle, et cetera. So I would see that as a benefit, but I recognize I'm also a very yes in my backyard person, and not everyone is. So I'd like to see that, and then I'd like to see, the data roll in from the new system, and I'd like to start to see the response to our programs to support the educators as well. And I'd like to have these questions around moving forward with funding for design 3 to 6 months from now with that information. I feel like I'd be in a much better place to approve that.
Thank you. Ward, I can go down to you.
Yeah, 6.5 million for 4 units is 1.625 million per unit. Construction cost, if you divide that out, it's $3,000 a square foot for housing. It just doesn't make sense to me. I understand you've got a sunk cost of site work of 5.4, and some of that's shared by the Learning Center, the Early Education Center, and some of it would be benefit to the housing, but this is just coming in at $1.625 million per workforce housing unit. To me, just doesn't seem defensible.
But just also, some of those are multiple bedrooms as well, and normally we break it down by bedroom.
I was breaking it down by units.
Yeah.
We have four units, so it's $1.625 million per unit.
Yeah.
So it's, the numbers on it are just staggering to me. I don't know how much further I want to go without having a real discussion with the master HOA. And I think, we're entitled to have 2 more units here, so we're increasing 2 more housing units, but I don't know if I can support the numbers as they pencil out at this point.
Thank you. Rachel?
Not sure I'm using all the right language, but I would like to make sure that we pay whatever we owe to the designers.
Yeah.
And then B, I'd like to make sure we can still get this through entitlements. And I don't know how much additional work that is. As I was saying, I could see taking only the childcare center through the entitlements, not the housing, until we discuss that further with the HOA and what it will cost. Because the last amendment that they made, when they talk about benefits, there was a dollar cost to those benefits that were provided to them then. And I really, as others have said, look forward to having the kind of unified wait list and the real information that we're going to get from that. But I don't see childcare need really dropping off or really being satisfied in the future with just what we have now. Whether Burlingame, Lumberyard is a great site or not, perhaps, but that I see that as being a decade or more away. So that's part of the challenge there. It might be helpful for all of us if we have some idea, what is this, and you may not know it offhand, but what is the square footage of the child care center we have now at the Yellow Brick? Is it around 18,000 square feet? Is it 12? I mean, that can be a future thing, but it'd be nice for all of our mental comparisons of what it is. And I know the bottom basement, unfortunately, is not really usable for childcare because of other issues there, but I think that'd be helpful. But I just want to get this, I don't want to put it on the shelf where it is now. Basically, I'd like to make sure we can get through entitlements and a future council can pursue it or pursue countywide funding for it or pursue other funding grants. But, you know, to say we have a drawing on the plans is different from saying we have entitlements for something we can build when you're pursuing funding. And so that's where I would get it to.
For clarification, the current yellow brick is about 21,000 square feet.
Yeah.
21, you said?
21.
Including the basement?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not all serviceable for this use, but we do have some services that occur in the basement of which handicap access is not, handicap accessible access is not required. So like individual therapeutic services, things like that, that may come into the building.
Cool.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you very much. That's where I come down.
John, any comments?
No, I share the same concerns everybody else does. I agree with Rachel. I'd like to see it at least develop the construction documents.
Well, I don't know that we need construction documents to get through entitlements.
Okay, land use approvals. Okay.
What you might want is the level of design to get us through land use application and entitlements.
Okay, yeah, I don't think our child care issues have gone away. So I think we don't necessarily want to back burner this, but we don't need to rush forward with it yet either.
And just, can I make sure I heard, so I'm hearing there's a majority interest in moving forward with a land use application, the amount of design that we need to get to that, to entitle the project, specifically the ECE center, not necessarily put the multifamily on the back burner, but start discussions with the HOA and kind of see if that's even feasible.
Can you explain in more detail the scope, time, and cost of that? Because I wasn't there, but I'm happy to listen to what that is if it's not a significant.
The scope, time, and cost of
That next step.
Yeah, to get to entitlements.
get to entitlements?
That all still needs to be scoped out and negotiated, determined exactly what will be the design team proceeding with it. We don't have that estimate tonight.
Okay.
Part of it, we had to understanding the scope, whether it included both buildings or not, to be able to have those kinds of conversations.
And is there any, I mean, other than the obvious, which is time passed, if we waited, like I said, 3 to 6 months to get more information about need and the interventions we're making around educators, other than the time passed, is there any negative impact of waiting? Well, it'll be more money. That's a good
Yeah.
point. Sure.
Yeah, construction.
But like, we're not going to lose these plans. They're not going to become unusable in some way. I mean, none of that kind of stuff.
So if you're asking if we go through the land use process,
I'm saying if we don't, if we
we
just
don't,
pause here on those
then you
things.
have schematic design. You'll probably have to do some additional work to get it to a place to submit a land use application. And you won't have a basically entitled vested project where council, your timeline for vesting is 3 years, but Burlingame was vested for 20 years, so you have the opportunity to vest a daycare center for a longer amount of time until you do have the funding or have the time to do the additional work.
So what is the next step for it coming back to us? Because to develop documents that are ready for entitlement and vesting the project require us to agree on what we are going to be entitling. And right now, we have questions around the housing versus the ECE. So what happens next?
So we had.
Do you want to, could I just jump in?
Go ahead.
I think the fundamental thing that I don't hear clarity at the table about yet is whether you want both buildings to go forward on the same timeline, or if you don't. So that's just getting to entitlement. regardless of the outcome of entitlement, it's getting to that conversation. So that would be really step one, is we're trying to understand the scope of the next phase. I've heard Councilmember Richards say, I want you to do them both, do them on parallel tracks, knowing one might go faster or slower.
No, I said do not do the entitlements on the housing. I said just do ELC.
Okay.
Just move that forward.
Is that where a majority of you are, that you wish to move the ELC entitlements forward? I think that's a yes or no question, that there's not a majority position on the council yet.
And so how does that work? So we just identified that there's a potential build for 18,000 square feet.
Well, 13,500 if you do the childcare.
Because that's what that parcel,
That's what
13.5 is the
building
square
on.
footage of the Early Childhood Education Center.
13.5. Okay.
And they are separated out enough that Building B on the screen is the multifamily. It's on the lots 3 and 4. So it is separated out, generally speaking. We might need to do a little bit of a lot line adjustment, but all of the childcare can be handled on
Yeah.
one parcel.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Okay, so the question was for clarification. Question number one, both buildings, one building. If you're supportive of this, again, I'm not supportive of moving forward right now, but if you're supportive of moving forward, one building or both buildings?
Well, sorry.
I want to know what the cost is going to be for moving forward just with the ECE versus getting to the position for the multifamily housing as well. If it's going to be, I can see going forward the ECEC, Early Childhood Education Center. I have a problem with the multifamily because of the costs.
Yeah, I guess I still don't understand. So in my mind, I'm not yet convinced that we need Building A. I think it's a great building if we do, and I think I'll have much better information in 3 to 6 months. So it's not clear to me why I would move forward knowing that when I can do that at that time. Building B, to me, we have a very clear need for that. But to your point, and to your point about the dollars per unit, I'd love to engage to see if we can get more units there, which is lower cost per unit. I imagine that they will want the child care center to go with it. But so to me, I'd rather continue the conversations about B while getting better information about A so that we can be prepared to answer these questions, all of them in the affirmative, in a couple months with better information. That's what makes sense to me.
Understood.
Okay.
Understood. So you have support for moving forward on this end of the table. You have 2 requests for information over here. So it sounds like coming back with some clarity around what it means to just pursue the educational facility, and then addressing, well, Skippy wants to really get back some of the information that we've requested, so.
Can I clarify a little more?
Sure.
I want to make sure we're meeting the council's expectations. I hear 3 of you are willing to go forward with Building A. You will, of course, have to approve the contract to award the design services, so you will see the final scope and cost.
3?
Yes, that is my count right now, that 3 of you are ready to go forward with Building A, knowing that you will see the design services contract before an application's actually filed. You're going to know that cost when it comes to you on a consent agenda like any other RFP or change order process of that magnitude. So that piece I understand. I understand 2 of you, either one of you is not supportive of moving either building forward, and one of you is not sure of moving Building A forward, and you're asking for additional information, but you would like to move B forward. I do not have a majority of council interested in moving B forward. I actually have one in favor and 4 not at the moment, is what I'm hearing. So that is my understanding of where the table is at, that the only design direction we're getting tonight is to move forward with Building A, go ahead and to negotiate the scope of services, to getting that through entitlement and bring that to you on a consent calendar agenda item sometimes here in the first part of next year.
That's a very good wrap-up. Can I ask a question?
Well done.
To everyone else, though?
Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see a bifurcation of A and B, if we go forward with just A or if we go forward with A and B, with the costs difference is going to be towards getting towards entitlement.
So now
Sarah
there's
is saying-
2 of you that are there, but not 3 of you. 3 of you are not there to support staff spending time on that.
Right, Sarah is saying that at this time with you, if you're with this, Building A can move forward, and you will get your financial information around Building A at the time where contracts come back to us.
Correct. And your request about Building B, right now, there's not a majority of council interested in exploring the advancement of Building B with tonight's direction. Doesn't mean that might not change in 6 months, but as of now, no. What we can tell you is once we get some ideas on some square foot costs and design costs in Building A, we can probably extrapolate out some ideas of what Building B might be.
Can I ask a clarifying question of the group? Thank you. Okay, got it. I understand why we would not want to move forward to entitlement on Building B if the neighborhood's not going to support it. But are we also saying we're not going to engage the HOA to find out if they will support it?
There has to be engagement with the HOA for Building A, and it certainly can be part of that conversation. What I'm hearing is don't let it drive the decision-making. The council wants to be able to move independently between the 2 buildings based on community needs.
And not just because of the reason you stated, but also because of cost concerns, but also density.
Well, and that's also part of it, right? Those cost concerns could potentially be ameliorated if
Addressed
there's,
with that.
with density. So I just want to make sure we're engaging and talking to them about that.
Since you're asking, Skippy, Building B is on a single-family lot. It's not a super big lot. No, A is, okay, yeah, it's
A
on
is 1
2.
lot.
2 lots.
B is on 2 single-family
Two
lots.
single-family lots. I'm just saying, I think we're getting close to maxing it out to begin with, and I don't know the number, maybe someone at this side of the table does, but what was the cost of the benefits to entice the homeowners association to allow it to even go X amount further before?
Yeah,
It was,
I don't have an answer for that right now. I don't recall. There were a lot of additional improvements that were made
I think
to the
there was a
area.
lot of money involved in trying to double the lot size.
it's a good question. I don't know the answer,
Yeah.
but it's worth knowing the answer.
I seem to recall it was a lot, and that's all I'm saying, is that, you know, we're already talking a pretty heavy subsidy on that building. We do have other sites and opportunities. I'm just pursuing more than a 4-plex there. What would you like to pursue, an 8-plex, a 6-plex? I mean, it's just too vague to say, let's start talking and negotiating with them about more housing, because I see a price tag that's going to be in the millions of dollars to add just to make it 4 instead of 2.
I think that they're all good questions to ask as far as what the number is. I mean, in the previous iteration, there was a version that had 7, right? So we've had something on that site already that had 7, and I don't know what that math looks like, but, and I take your point about like the relative cost, and we're going to have to consider that, but as far as places that are already housing in community, and just thinking about how child dense that neighborhood is and how short we are on teachers, I would think it's a strong incentive for people to accept more density than maybe they otherwise would, so it's worth asking.
Yeah,
That's all.
I don't disagree.
Then it comes back to you. Are you supportive of moving forward
With A,
work on Building A?
Building A.
Yeah?
And then we can extrapolate or guesstimate what entitlements going forward for B may be, but
Yeah, they can talk about it. I have no problem with negotiating. If they come back with a great answer, let's start moving it forward, but,
And if not, then we won't.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
But
fine.
let's not spend any more money on design of it until we know that
No, I
will
agree with that.
happen.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
And then the answer to your last question is that council is supportive of the change order that has already been fulfilled.
Yeah, of the funding for it,
Yes.
yes. Okay.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is Building A, we'll scope out, we'll bring back, because it is a bigger building than initially anticipated. So it's a little different than the original contract. We're interested in going through land use approvals and review and entitlements for that building. And that is what I have heard so far.
Right, that, and then we can talk offline what to do about Building B. I think that needs to be some conversation back and forth about what the design team looks like and what we need at the table.
And Jen, the assumption is engagement with the master HOA for this as we go forward?
Does or does not?
That's my question too. I'm assuming
Because of the
that-
entitlement process in Building A, the master HOA, the HOAs, actually, not just the master, all the HOAs will have involvement as adjoining property owners. It's the reality of just the entitlement process. They'll be within the 150 or 300 feet.
And probably by the time we get around to this, it's going to be BG 1, 2, and 3 HOAs, and just master of all.
Well, yeah, we'll see what the council's decisions are about that, we need to get some decisions made on BG3 that will be coming back to council in first quarter. That could affect a little bit of how that arrangement looks. But we're looking forward to getting those units out the door pretty quickly. The other thing is at these price tags, there's some real planning that needs to happen in this fund if the council is contemplating any construction.
Thanks. Just one other comment on the aside here. I really appreciate the design team. I see them online and listening in on the conversation tonight. Thank you guys for your diligence and your work on this. I did just want to share my opinion of the design that I saw. I think that it looks beautiful. The one exception, and I still think it looks beautiful, but there is an architectural feature that is coming off of the top of the building that to me is not necessary. It's a very, I think it's a well-designed and discreet-looking building without that top hat on it, and I would probably be more inclined for a design that didn't have the top hat.
My guess is part of the top hat is light as well, so
Light well.
while we might reduce that, we should still be mindful of.
It reminds me of City Hall.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big.
That's a single diamond. It's not quite a double diamond one.
Well, we're at schematic and we can refine design.
That'd be great. Any other information from us this evening, Jen?
No, unless the consultants have a burning question. I know Andy wanted to comment earlier, and I missed it on my text because I'm focusing on you.
I think we have direction.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank
you,
you.
Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you guys for staying.
Thank you, everybody that's online. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, colleagues.
That is our final agenda item for this evening. Thank you to GrassRoots, and thank you to those that joined us this evening on our Zoom meeting. We are back tomorrow with a 5 p.m. Meeting, and of course, we start those meetings off with citizens' comments and petitions, so join us then if you like. Thank you.
Gracias. Sorry, I had to get going. Something. Tried to put on the bags, they weren't so.